Ghost of a Chance. Vampire Dead-tective Book 4. Written by Flynn. Chapter 1. It was a gloriously sunny day, and I slept through all of it. Every little bit of sunlight was gone by the time I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was an unforgiving hand. When I tried to roll away from it, the hand rolled me back and shook harder. It also had a voice. "You must arise," came the voice. I creaked open an eyelid, and glared at the vampire who stood over me. It was Vincent the vampire, and I still lay on my comfortable bed long after the sun had set. "Just 5 more minutes, Mom," I muttered. I tried to roll over, but he still held my shoulder in his tight, demonic grip. "We don't have time to waste if we're to find the answer to the card," he reminded me. I glared at him with the power of both eyes. "Card? What card?" He pulled a half of a card from inside his long coat. It was the Queen of Hearts from a deck of playing cards. This card. Seeing the card made all the horrible, and not so horrible memories come back to me. There was our little adventure with Simone and her hexing Vince, and our near deaths in the lair of the underground undead. Our fun times. I sat up and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. But how are we supposed to find out something about that? Didn't Simone say we'd need to do a semen or something to find someone? Seance, and there are people capable of making the connection for us, but not if we do not hurry, Vince insisted. "All right," I stifled a yawn and swung my legs over the bed, up or close to it. Where are we going to find this professional seance person anyway? There are many mediums located in the city. The one I had in mind is located at the edge of the blighted area, he told me. I furrowed my brow and tapped a finger on my chin. Blighted area? Oh yeah, that's the place where Riven shows off his work on the city, right? I asked him. That is correct, but we don't have time for a history lesson. He turned and walked toward the door. "Hey Vince," I called to him. He paused and half turned to me. I grinned at him and nodded at his temples. They were still gray from his experience as an old geezer. "I still like the hairstyle." He bowed his head and left without a word. I took that as his accepting the compliment, and prepared for our visit to the medium. That involved pressing my wrinkled clothes with my hands and tying my hair back, because Vince wasn't going to give me enough time to wash it. In a minute I was ready, and I met Vince at the front door. We traveled to the car, and he drove us through the ruined neighborhoods to the ones wrecked by Riven. Run-down buildings were replaced by rotting ones, and litter-filled alleys changed to weed-infested lawns. Flickering streetlights disappeared, and the darkness of the night covered everything. Why don't our adventures ever take us someplace more cheerful? Like a cemetery? I quipped as I watched the depressing world fly by. "It may before the night is over," Vince warned me. I snorted. I can hardly wait. Our new adventure led us to the edge of the blight, where there was actual grass in the lawns, but weeds and darkness still covered much of the area. The houses were large Victorian mansions, most in disrepair but a few inhabited by stubborn owners. Tall oak trees grew along the road and draped their branches over the road like a dark, endless tunnel. 8-foot-tall shrubs and skeletal decorative trees dotted the yards. I noticed a large Victorian house ahead of us on the next corner, with its shutters painted a bright fire truck red. The porch looked stable, and the front room window shone with light. A few cars sat on the grassy curb, and Vince parked us behind one of the vehicles. We got out and I tilted my head back to get a good look at the gable roof, bay windows and fish-scale shingles on the walls. A crow sat on the highest peak of the roof, and glared down at us with its beady yellow eyes. It was all so delightfully scary, that I shuddered and flickered my eyes to Vince. "About that cemetery. It's looking pretty good right now," I mused. "Perhaps later. The medium we wish to meet resides here," he informed me. "Why are we seeing this one?" I asked him. "She honors her client's privacy," he explained. He strode forward to the steps that led onto the covered porch. Medium client privilege, eh? I quipped as I followed behind him.
Something of that nature, he agreed.
We reached the wooden front door and Vince knocked. The entrance creaked open on hinges that needed oiling 30 years ago. There was so much chunky rust on them, I could have graveled the road with it. Our greeter turned out to be a young woman of about 20, with beautiful grey eyes and no legs. That probably had something to do with the bottom half of her being transparent, and her upper body floating 2 feet off the ground. I let out a small eep and slipped behind Vince. The ghost girl smiled at us.
"What can I do for you?" she inquired.
"We wish to see Madam Mim," Vince replied. I snorted. "Madam Mim? Do you have an appointment?" the ghost wondered. "No, but I have been a client in the past," he revealed.
"Your name?"
"Vincent."
"One moment, please."
The ghost closed the door, and I whipped my head to Vince. "Are we going to be seeing a lot of those types of people on this adventure?" I asked him. "Undoubtedly," he replied. My shoulders drooped and I returned to his side. I don't think I'm ever going to get used to this paranormal society. Just when I think I can handle anything that's thrown at me, a ghost comes and throws a transparent monkey wrench into the machinery. I stood at attention when the door opened, and the ghost woman smiled at us. She stepped aside and gestured down the hall that ran down the center of the house. "If you would care to take a seat in the parlor behind the first door on the right, then Madam Mim will be with you in a moment."
"Well, at least we don't have to take a number," I muttered beneath my breath as Vince led the way down the hall.
The old house had peeling flowered wallpaper, but the floor was clean and there was no smell of damp. Vince turned us into the right-hand room, and I saw it was a small square room. The windows were covered in black lace, as were the lampshades, and plain chairs lined the walls to our right and in front of us. To our left, and a little away from the wall, was a doorway with thick black curtains. Black wallpaper with dark gold stripes covered the walls, and the carpet was also black. The atmosphere was made all the more depressing by the inhabitants. A man sat opposite where we stood, and in his hands was a small fire engine. He stared morosely at the toy, and occasionally let out a heaving sigh. To our right and close to the wall sat an old woman with a younger one, and the younger one tried to console her sniffling companion. "I'm sure she'll be able to find Grandpa," the younger one whispered to the older woman. The older woman sighed and shook her head. She spoke with a thick Eastern European accent. "It is of no use. He is lost to me forever." Vince led us to a pair of chairs in the corner of the room, and we took a seat. My eyes lingered on the man with the toy, until I decided the gloomy wallpaper was much more cheerful. After 10 minutes of depressing agony, the heavy curtains in front of the other doorway parted, and a middle-aged woman stepped out. The woman was in tears, and blew loudly on a handkerchief. Behind her was a tiny old woman of 70, who wore a black shawl over her hunched shoulders and a soft, kind smile on her wizened face. She patted the younger woman's shoulder with her wrinkled hand. "I am sure it will be all right now for you and your brother." The other woman smiled and nodded.
"Yes, but I don't know how to thank you enough, Madam Mim."
"My assistant will tell you my bill." "That will be thanks enough," the older woman returned. The client left, and Madam Mim swept her eyes over the small room. The man caught her eye and stood, but she waved him down in his seat. "In a moment, sir. I can sense there is some urgency with these other clients. Come into my parlor, please." She gestured to us, and Vince stood. Chapter 2. Madam Mim slipped into the other room, and we followed. The second room was completely shrouded in darkness. No natural light permeated its windows, and heavy curtains hung from the ceiling and almost forced Vince to stoop. A round table sat in the center of the small room, and on its blood-red tablecloth was a deck of cards and a small crystal ball on a pedestal. On the opposite side to us sat a single chair, and close to us were 2 more seats. Madam Mim took her position opposite us, and gestured to the other chairs. It's not often the dead visit me, without me calling for them. What can I do for you? She asked us. Vince walked up to the table and took a seat. I followed his example. He pulled forth the card from his coat and tossed it to the medium. We need you to find who holds the other half of the card. We were told we would need a medium to do so, he explained. She picked up the folded card and studied it for a moment before she set the card face up on the table and raised an eyebrow.
That isn't much to go on.
Got a name or a face? She asked us. Vince shook his head.
Nothing.
Madam Mim frowned and set the card face up in front of her. All right, I'll try, but it'll cost you extra because this isn't going to be easy. Isn't there some sort of impression from the person we want to talk to? I wondered. She snorted and tapped the face of the card.
There isn't even many fingerprints on this card, much less an impression.
This will be like dialing a phone number with only one digit. Vince reached for the card. If you are unable to perform the task, then we may find others to. Mim set her palm on the card and glared at him. I will find this person, but like I said, it will cost extra and you won't find the rates of the others any cheaper. Do we have a deal, or what? Vince retracted his hand and nodded. We have a deal. Good. Now be quiet and let me concentrate. The woman set the tips of her fingers of one of her hands on the card and closed her eyes.
Shouldn't we join hands or something?
I wondered. Madam Mim opened one eye and frowned at me. That is a bunch of hogwash now, hush. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back so her chin pointed upward. Oh, spirits of the other side, please help me find one who knows the meaning of this card and holds the other half. Or maybe just call Hilda so we can ask her about it, I muttered. The medium opened her eyes and looked up at the ceiling. Remain still. I'm getting something, she whispered. Movement over the table caught my eyes, and I tilted my head back to gaze at the ceiling. A wispy white fog appeared out of thin air 4 feet above the table. The fog glowed with an unearthly light, which was pretty fitting considering this wasn't earthly, and the whiteness slowly formed itself into the shape of an older woman. She was or had been about 65 with wrinkles on her thin face. Her grayish hair was permed, and she wore a flowered dress that hugged her skinny frame. The bottom half of her slipped into a smoky point, like a genie chained to a magic lamp. The ghost's sharp eyes swept over us and her tight mouth curled down in a deep scowl.
What the hell do you want? She growled in a raspy voice that could have startled a deaf man.
The medium frowned and tapped the card with one finger. These nice people wish to know if you hold the other half of this card. The ghost floated closer to the table, and I felt the temperature of the room lower with her ghostly body. She squinted her eyes, and after a moment gave a nod.
Yes, I do.
We wish to know what Hilda told or gave to you, Vince spoke up. The ghost's eyes flickered to us, and she scrutinized our faces. Hilda told me someone would be snooping around for it, but I'm not telling anything until I get some help from you. I raised an eyebrow and glanced at Madam Mim.
Is this how it usually works?
I spoke up. The medium snorted.
Not usually, but the pushier ghosts may demand many things, she told me.
The ghost whipped her head to medium and glared at her. What I demand is not because I am pushy, but because I am restless, and I'm not helping anyone until my body is found.
Have you checked your other spook outfit?
I asked her. She crossed her arms and floated closer to the ceiling. Her outline dimmed, and her voice sounded farther away as though she spoke through a long tunnel. Fine. We'll see how long it takes you to find what Hilda gave me on your own. Vince stood so fast his chair tumbled back onto the ground.
What did Hilda give to you?
He questioned her. She stopped her disappearing act and shrugged. If you want to know, then you have to find my body.
Why do you think we can find your body?
I asked her. She sighed and gestured to Vince. Every spook in the city knows about the Vampire Detective Agency, and if he's a vampire, then he's the detective. Besides, Hilda told me he might come snooping around looking for the card and what she gave me. Now will you help me, or must I take my problem elsewhere? Vince nodded. Very well, we will assist you. What must we do? The ghost's eyes flickered to the medium, and she furrowed her brow. This is a personal matter, and I would rather speak to you in private. You will meet me at my property, at 113 Rue de Morgue by the Old Hollow Oak. Be there in an hour, or our agreement is no more. The ghost disappeared in a cloud of smoke, and the light in the room vanished. I blinked at the medium and Vince.
What just happened?
Vince pursed his lips.
It seems we have another job.
I wouldn't take this one, detective, Madam Mim spoke up. I've dealt with enough spirits in my profession, not to trust to meet one on their terms and on their property. There's a lot of bad spirits, who want to lead a person to death out of jealousy of the living.
How much do we owe you?
Vince asked her, ignoring her warning. The medium sighed, and held out her hand palm up. Don't say I didn't warn you, and that warning cost you extra. That brings your bill to $500. Our bill was paid, and we left the old Victorian mansion. I paused at the front of the car, and looked over the hood to Vince. You think Madam Mim's right about this being a trap? I asked him. Do we have a choice? He countered. I shrugged. I don't know. You're the expert in the supernatural, you tell me. You have had your fair share of adventures to know caution is the best policy, he argued before he ducked into the car. I furrowed my brow, and joined him in the car where I frowned at him.
Was that a backhanded compliment?
I asked him. A ghost of a smile slipped onto his lips. Perhaps. Aha, and perhaps I'm a half-vampire human stuck to an ancient vampire on a mission to get ourselves killed, I quipped. I noticed the smile slipped away at my sentence. What? Am I wrong? He started the car and pulled away from the curb.
No, not wrong, he replied. So what's the matter?
I persisted.
Nothing, he mumbled.
Vince never mumbled. I scooted close to him, as I was uninhibited by a seatbelt in this old pieced-together death machine. Fess up, what do you know? Much, but we must focus on the problem at hand. The property at Rue de Morgue is quite large, and we may not be able to find the tree quickly, he informed me. Don't we have a super sniffer, or something we can use? I asked him. That isn't an ability given to most vampires, he admitted. I slipped back into my seat and sighed. Of course not. That would be really useful right now. I paused and tapped my chin. Then again, it would have been really bad to have that in the sewers, and we've been in the sewers a lot. Do you never stop prattling? Vince inquired. I grinned and batted my eyelashes at him. Nope, but you know you love me for it. I was startled to notice a slight hint of blush on his pale cheeks. Are you blushing? I teased him. Vince turned away from me, and somehow didn't drive us off the road. No. I wickedly grinned and scooted close to him again.
Aha! And I'm the queen of the ghosts.
You may become an astral spirit if you do not focus on the problem at hand, he warned me. I leaned my left arm against his right one. Come on, admit you like me a little. I did save your life in that alley in the underground.
I don't expect the situation to be repeated, he quipped. You never know, I cooed.
Vince sharply turned the wheel, and the car slid onto a left-hand street. I was unprepared for the turn, and slid sideways into the passenger side door. Would it kill you to feel a little bit more? I growled. Vince's reply was to slam on the brakes, and send me hurtling into the dashboard. I grasped the front and whipped my head to him for another glare, but he ignored me and nodded at the view ahead of us. We are there. I followed his gaze, and was presented with a view of one of the spookiest Victorian mansions I'd ever seen. The house made Madam Mim's place look like a well-kept resort. The shutters hung from one or two loose nails, and the paint and shine had long ago peeled from the fish-scale shingles. The pointed roofs stuck into the clear sky like daggers, and there were no friendly lights to lighten the dark mood. The house was surrounded on all sides by a large yard, or park, and sat 50 yards back from the cracked concrete road on which we parked. Tall, scraggly bushes ran around the perimeter of the park, and inside were more wild bushes and scores of tall ancient trees with dead skeletal branches that knocked against each other in the slightest breeze. "Geez, I wonder why she'd ever want to stop haunting this place," I muttered. A weed-choked gravel driveway led from the road through the forested park up to the front of the house, and the whole structure sat atop a small, gentle hill. At the mouth of the driveway was a faded for sale sign that stood askew on its rickety old wood post. Vince drove us up the drive, and 15 yards from the house I noticed a small cottage 20 yards to the left of the mansion. A pale light shone through one of the windows, showing that at least one living person still inhabited the area. Vince parked us in front of the teetering covered porch with its broken half-dozen steps, and we stepped out. I looked up at the house, and a shiver swept over me. It was the first time in a long time that I'd been cold from the night air. I glanced at Vince. "Now what do we do?" "Hope we find," a quiet mumbling interrupted my questions, and soon a whole man strode around the far corner of the house between the cottage and the mansion. He was my height, about 60, with a balding head, and wore shabby clothes that hung loose around his frame. He must have lost weight since buying them. His head was bowed, and he clutched a scrap of paper in his hand on which his eyes were glued. All that was average enough, except for the huge cross around his neck, and the rosary in his paperless hand. There was also a strong smell of garlic and other herbs on his person that nearly made me gag. I noticed Vince take an involuntary step backward. The stranger muttered something beneath his breath, of which I caught only the slightest hint. "Damn him. He thinks he can get away with," the man jolted to a stop and his head whipped up to us. He stuffed the scrap of paper into a pocket, and glared at us. "Who the hell are you and what the hell are you doing here?" he snapped. I stepped to the forefront of our pairing. Vince may have been our liaison with the dead, but I could handle the living. "Hello, Mr. Robert Morley, and this is my property," he growled. I smiled at him. "Just the man we wanted to meet. We saw the for sale sign at the road, and wondered how much your lovely house would cost." I sidled up to Vince, looped my arms around one of his, and rubbed my cheek against his sleeve. I was surprised when he only stiffened a little, and didn't outright toss me to the ground. "You see, we're looking for our first home together, and thought your house would make the perfect honeymoon home." "What are your names?" Morley questioned us. I'm Liz Vance and this is Vince Vance," I replied. The man raised an eyebrow. "Vince Vance," he repeated. His parents had a sick sense of humor, but we were wondering about the house. "How much is it?" Morley visibly relaxed, and nodded at the heap of wood formerly known as a residence. "If you want the place, it's $30,000 for the house and lot if you pay in cash, and twice that if you don't." I raised an eyebrow. "Why so cheap?" "None of your business. And if you're not going to pay that amount, then get the hell out of here," he insisted. "But we haven't even gotten a look around," I argued. "No." His reply was so fast and cold that I started back. He caught himself and pursed his lips. "The grounds and house aren't safe, so nobody can go through them." "You're not seriously expecting us to buy a house without looking at it, are you?" I questioned him. He scowled. "Listen, I'm giving a good price, and if you don't want it, then you can get the hell out of here." He jabbed a finger down the gravel driveway. "Go on. Get." "But." Morley reached into his droopy coat and pulled out a revolver with 6 shots. He cocked back the hammer and swung the barrel of the revolver between us. I said, "Get. Now scram before I waste some silver bullets on you." Vince set one of his hands over mine that held onto his arm, and bowed his head to Morley. "We apologize for the intrusion. Come, wife, let us away," told me. We turned away from the angry little man, climbed back into the car, and drove away from the dreary house and its rundown park. Chapter 3. What a smelly pain in the ass, I mumbled. It was fortunate he did not shoot us, Vince spoke up as we bumped onto the pothole-filled road. I glanced at him. I thought silver bullets only worked on werewolves. They are fatal to werewolves, but the purity of the silver will cause other supernatural creatures extreme pain, and the weaker ones possible death. He may have also coated the bullets with the herbs he smeared on his person to increase their potency, Vince told me. I wrinkled my nose. You mean all those smells? I just thought he was trying to be a walking herb garden. Those smells were the amalgamation of several powerful, anti-supernatural herbs and metals. I have never encountered so many on one person before, he mused.
So, is he trying to keep away his mom?
I guessed. Vince parked the car along the road, shut off the engine and leaned back in his seat. His lips were pursed together, and he glared at emptiness over the dashboard. I believe all the precautions were regarding that slip of paper.
Is he that afraid of a paper cut?
I quipped. Vince shook his head. No. The insignia on the paper was a motif of a skull within a circle, and a cross over the bones.
Sounds like Morley doesn't like pirates, I commented.
The insignia is one used by a powerful syndicate affiliated with Riven. They trade in anti-supernatural items and hexing people using illegal curses, he explained.
Let me guess, past trouble with them?
I mused. Yes. Tim and I had indirect dealings with them, when humans found themselves in need of a curse removal, or other supernatural creatures came to us after being attacked by humans who wielded these anti-supernatural items. We never discovered the controller of the supernatural syndicate, only the agents, he told me. I cringed. How many unsolved mysteries did you and Tim pick up? I wondered. Far too many, Vince commented. So these guys are affiliated with Riven, how? I inquired. They have traded resources. Werewolves for spells and such, he answered. I slid down my seat and groaned.
Just what we need, more enemies.
We will focus on Riven, and handle the supernatural syndicate only if we must, he instructed me. So these anti-supernatural things won't kill strong paranormal creatures, right? I asked him.
That's correct, he replied.
So which category do you fall under? I asked him. Need you ask, he returned. I shrugged.
I just wanted to make sure I was stuck to the stronger one, I teased. It won't kill me, but it may seriously harm you, he revealed.
I cringed. I see your point. A good idea to run.
We're not running.
He opened his door and stepped out. I noticed we were parked on the far edge of the park wilderness. We are merely taking a less direct route. And if he catches us, he's merely going to shoot us, I quipped as I slid out.
The risk of being a detective, he reminded me.
He led me through the untamed bushes, and onto the crabgrass-infested lawn. You ever thought about retiring and enjoying all that hard cash hidden under your coffin? I asked him.
Yes, was the surprising reply.
My eyes flickered to him, and I raised an eyebrow.
So why don't you? I mean, after we find what Tim was up to, I added.
Believing we will survive this hunt is overly optimistic, so I will leave the future to the future, he answered. I grabbed his arm and arrested our walk. Vince turned to me with a raised eyebrow, and I shakily smiled at him. You ever thought about dropping this whole thing? You know, just letting Tim rest in peace and getting out of here. We could buy an island and live off the blood of shipwreck survivors. Vince frowned. Have you forgotten that Tim's dead, I interrupted him. I turned my face away and bit my lip. Tim was a good friend, but maybe it's time to move on before somebody gets seriously hurt, maybe even killed. It's not that I'm really afraid of dying. Well, I'm actually terrified, but it's just that, well, I don't want to lose you. I almost lost you a few days ago, and I don't want to see that happen again, okay? I started when his cold hand settled on mine, and I whipped my head up to look into his eyes. His cold red ones held a soft light in them.
Liz,
There you two are. What in the hell took you? A banshee of a voice interrupted us. We jumped apart and turned to the thick mess of trees in front of us. The old woman's ghost floated out with her astral arms crossed over her transparent chest. She stopped in front of us and scowled. I told you to meet me at the hollow tree, and here I find you dallying by the road. I marched up to her and stuck my face in hers. You didn't tell us the welcoming party was a trigger-happy asshole, I snapped back. She floated back and waved away my concerns with her hand.
That nincompoop?
That's just my idiot son. He's the one who murdered me 10 years ago. I started back. Murdered you? I repeated. She gestured down at her corporal self. I didn't get this way by falling into a gopher hole. Then do you wish us to avenge your death? Vince guessed. She turned her nose up and snorted.
No, it's past time for that.
That idiot isn't going to learn that he shouldn't have done it, and I'm only hoping I've scared him enough he'll never have a good night's sleep for the rest of his life, natural and unnatural. I held up my hands, palms out.
Wait a sec.
So you're a murder victim done in by your own son, and we're supposed to do what now? Ask him where he hid your body 10 years ago. No, ask him where he hid my body a week ago, she corrected me.
Why did he do that?
I asked her.
I don't know and I don't care.
All I care about is finding my bones and you two giving them a proper burial so I can rest in peace, she snapped. Don't you know where he hid your body?
I mean, can't you sense it?
I wondered. Don't you know anything? The astral body and real body don't work like that, she growled. She paused and rolled her eyes up to heaven. All right. Since I can see I didn't get the cream of the intellect crop, I'll start from the beginning. I was starting to see why the sun had knocked her off. My name is Harriet Morley, and I was a very wealthy woman in my day. Bobby, that's the boy you met, he wanted the money I'd saved up from my husband's life insurance policy. Frank died about 20 years ago, and left me enough to live on for longer than I lived. Bobby wanted it all, and never did have the patience to wait for anything, so that spoiled boy of mine killed me with a knife to the back and stuffed my body in a trunk for a couple of years. Didn't anybody notice you were gone? I wondered. No. I didn't have many friends, she replied. Geez, I wonder why. I muttered. Of course the police came around, but for once Bobby cleaned up after himself. They couldn't find evidence of what he'd done, and stopped looking for me after a while. Of course I tried to get their attention, but so few people believe in ghosts nowadays, that the only person I could talk to was Bobby.
Those must have been some awkward conversations, I commented.
A sly grin slipped onto her lips. They were for him. I'd scare him to death by floating through the walls and he'd run screaming from room to room with me chasing him. He tried moving my body to the basement, and burying me there, hoping it would quiet me. That boy always was an idiot. Any fool knows a spirit can't be quieted, except with revenge or a proper burial.
So he's sticking around for what?
Waiting for you to be declared dead, so he can inherit the money? I guessed. She scowled at me. I'm getting there. As I was saying, it only took 2 years to scare him out of the main house, and he took up in the cottage, but I followed him there and tormented him until he started putting up all those awful symbols on the walls about 4 years ago. He also took to covering himself in all that nasty smelling gunk, so that I couldn't spook him outside the cottage. Of course, he doesn't usually come out anymore, not even to look for where I hid the money. That's why he's sticking around. Didn't get the money because I hid it where I hid what Hilda gave to me, and nobody's finding anything until I find my body.
Let me get this straight, I spoke up.
You died 10 years ago, and Hilda gave you something a few months ago. Harriet rolled her eyes toward Vince, and jerked her head toward me. Where'd you pick this one up, the human world?
Yes, he told her.
The ghost sighed and returned her attention to me. I caught Hilda snatching some mushrooms from my property a few years ago, and we grew friendly. That's why she gave me the well, why she gave me what she gave me, and why you're going to help me find my body. If I can't get Bobby to confess to his horrible deed, then my body needs to have a proper burial for me to rest in eternal peace, and you're going to do that for me. I'm tired of spooking that idiot into doing what's right. He's never going to change, just like his father, and I may as well leave him to rot in this mausoleum he's made of my property, she explained to us.
So we just have to dig up your body in the basement and put it in a cemetery?
I guessed. Her face fell, and she floated to and fro.
That's where you two come in.
My body, or what's left of it, has been stolen. My eyes widened.
Someone dug up your body and moved it.
She floated towards the house. It's easier if I show you, and maybe you're smarter than you look and will see something I missed. Chapter 4. Harriet led us up the slight hill toward the house. I sidled up to Vince and lowered my voice. You think she's telling the truth about this whole murder business, and us needing to find her body to put her at peace? I whispered. We will see, he replied. So in your cute little way you're saying you don't know? I teased. I thought I detected a hint of color in his cheeks. Is the great Vince the vampire blushing? No. Then you might want to rub that rouge off your cheeks.
It doesn't become you.
What are you two whispering back there? Harriet screeched. I gave her a wide, scary smile, and gestured to a bunch of overgrown, thorny roses we passed.
Just admiring your yard.
A beaming smile slipped onto her lips, and her eyes took on a faraway look. You should have seen it when I was alive. This place was the envy of the street, she bragged. We reached the side of the house where lay a wooden cellar door set into, at an angle in the ground and against the siding of the house. She gestured to the pair of metal handles and a fresh lock. I used to be down there, she informed us. Why the fresh lock? I asked her. Every year Bobby gets a new one just to make sure nobody gets in, she explained. Vince knelt in front of the doors and grasped the lock in one hand. He pulled a large ring of keys from inside his jacket and tried them one at a time.
Why don't you just crush the lock with your hand?
I suggested. A broken lock would raise suspicion, and if we cannot approach him to interrogate him about the body, then we must keep him off his guard so he may lead us to it, he told me. The lock snapped open, and Vince set it aside and opened one of the doors. Our supernatural eyes allowed us to see into the dark, dank gloom of the basement. The floor was made of earth, and a short flight of long, narrow steps led to the ground. Vince led the way down the steps and into the large square room. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, which was open to the subfloor. Frayed electrical wires twisted and crossed over one another, in their attempts to supply the house with power. Short tubes of rusted old water pipes were disconnected from each other, and hung low enough to knock into our heads. The smell of mold permeated every corner of the crowded room, where wooden and cardboard boxes were stacked to the ceiling and rotten from the damp. In the far right corner sat the stairs that gave entrance to the house.
Glad we didn't buy the place, I muttered.
I was over here, Harriet directed us. She led us behind a dusty stack of crates that hid the far left corner of the basement. In the light dusty brown dirt of the basement floor was a foot-deep hole, and around the hole was the dark ground of recently disturbed earth. The ghost gestured to the hole.
That's where I called my grave for the better part of 10 years, and just look at it.
The thief didn't even leave me a finger bone. Vince knelt before the hole, and traced one hand over the disturbed earth. His eyes followed his fingers as they traveled along the lip closest to where we entered this small nook. He turned on his heels, and followed a strange pattern in the dirt. I nodded at the scrape marks.
What are those?
Someone dragged a sack to the steps of the basement that lead into the house, Vince surmised. Harriet scoffed.
That's nothing.
I've already seen that, but you should see the mess they made on my old floors. Idiot didn't even wipe his boots before he traipsed across those real hardwood planks. Vince stood and a frown crossed his lips. His eyes flickered to Harriet. Would your son have any reason to hide your body in a new location? She shrugged.
How should I know the mind of an idiot?
Would he? Vince persisted. Harriet sighed and shook her head.
Nothing I could think of, but like I said, he's an idiot, and I can't get him to talk to me. Why don't I try again?
I offered. Do you wish to risk it? Vince asked me. I snorted. I think that's the first time you've ever tried to change my mind about doing something incredibly stupid and dangerous, but yeah, I'll risk it. We don't really have any other choice except for following this dirt trail. I nodded at the clumps of earth left on the narrow steps that led up to the old door into the house. We will follow the trail as far as it leads us and then see if we must attempt contact with the sun, Vince suggested.
And I'll give the grand tour, Harriet insisted.
Our ghostly guide led us up the dusty, creaky stairs and through the basement door. Well, she went through the door. We solid people had to open the door. Vince tested the knob and found it unlocked. He opened the door and found Harriet on the other side with a stunned look on her face. We furthered our trespassing by entering the main floor of the house. Has your son often left this door unlocked? Vince asked her. She shook her head. Never. He's an idiot, but he'd make a good cow with how he sticks to his routine. Then it seems someone was negligent, or didn't care to hide the missing body, Vince deduced. I looked around where we stood. The stairs opened onto the back of the house. To our right lay the rear door, and to our left was a long hallway that stretched to the front entrance. Doors lined the wall to our immediate left, and a single door lay on the opposite wall. At the front of the house, I could see the banister of stairs along that same opposing wall. The house at one time must have been beautiful, at least judging by the peeling flowered wallpaper and real hardwood floors once shined to a reflective polish, but now covered in dust. The ceilings were tall, and vents along the lower part of the walls told of a centralized heating system. Alcoves between the doors and 2 feet off the ground held smashed stone statues, and the wooden baseboards were of a dark, rich, expensive mahogany. Harriet floated over to one of the statues and glared at it.
That stupid boy thought I hid the money in these statues.
They weren't even hollow, but he smashed them to bits anyway. Vince and I ignored her prattling. His attention was on the dark earth beneath our feet, and mine was on him. The trail took a right turn outside, and Vince tried the door. Like the basement door, this entrance was unlocked. He turned to the fuming phantom. Does anyone else? For the first time I jumped forward and clamped a hand over his mouth. A noise in front of the house had caught my ears. I want them trespassed immediately, we heard Bobby shout.
I'll tell you one more time.
We can't cite someone for trespassing without knowing who they are, and you're telling me you don't know the people who came here, an unknown male voice replied.
Then find out.
I gave you a description of their weird vehicle, and its license plate. That should be enough. Bobby protested. Listen, sir, some days we perform miracles, but this might not be one of them. I can run the description of the car and its plate through our list of stolen vehicles and whatnot, but there's no guarantee we can press charges, the other man argued. Then do that and get on it. I don't want any snooping around and wrecking the place. Bobby ordered him. I snorted. They'd have to clean up the place first to wreck it.
We'll try our best, sir.
Let me run that license plate through our database and see what I can find. Vince slunk down the hall to a tall, narrow window covered by a moth-eaten curtain. I followed, and we both peeked out through the moth holes. Bobby stood on the gravel driveway in front of the house, and in front of him was a police car. I could see the officer inside the car, typing the information given to him by Bobby. Think they'll find us on record? I asked Vince. Undoubtedly. Tim and I have a long record of eluding the law with the car, he reminded me. There goes the plan to coax him into telling us where the family skeletons are buried, I quipped. In a moment, the officer climbed out of the car with a printout of a picture which he handed to Bobby.
This the car you saw?
Bobby perused the picture and gave an emphatic nod.
Yes, that's it.
Who are they? We don't know, but we consider the owner or owners of the vehicle to be very dangerous. They have more vehicular violations than half the total city, the officer replied.
So why don't you arrest them?
Bobby questioned him. The officer shrugged. We can't catch them, but if you see them again, don't approach them. Call us and we'll handle the situation. So you're not going to do anything about them right now? Bobby persisted. We can't follow them because we don't know where they went, but we'll keep a patrol car around the block just in case they show up again, the officer promised. Anyway, have a good night and don't forget to call us. The officer slipped back into his car and drove away. Bobby turned away from the leaving vehicle, with a sulking expression on his thin, pale face.
Damn cops not protecting me, he mumbled.
Vince slipped away from the window and back to the rear of the house, and Harriet and I followed him. We must leave before our car is discovered, he commented.
What about my body?
Harriet insisted. We can find nothing of importance here, but do you know of anyone else who might have a key to the house? Vince asked her. She furrowed her brow.
There's Bobby's solicitor.
Some man named Craig Bartlett. He hired him about 4 years ago to handle my death proceedings, and he visits every few months. I've never seen him in the house, but he might have a key. We will speak with this solicitor and find if he knows anything, Vince suggested. You can find his office somewhere along Mephisto Street, Harriet told us. We will look for him there. Vince opened the unlocked back door and paused on the threshold. His eyes scrutinized the ground, and I followed his gaze. There wasn't anything unusual about the hard-packed, weedy earth.
What is it?
I asked him. The trail of earth is gone, and yet there are no tracks from a vehicle or wheelbarrow. It seems that whoever stole the bag was perfectly capable of carrying it up the stairs in their arms or over their shoulder, he explained.
So why didn't they?
I asked him. They wished to attract the attention of Morley with the trail of dirt and the unlocked doors, he surmised.
So it wasn't Bobby who stole my body?
Harriet questioned him. I don't believe so, but we will speak with the solicitor and see what he knows, Vince replied.
Well, don't take too long.
I'm not getting any younger here, Harriet scolded us. Chapter 5. We trudged through the wilderness to our car. The cop hadn't yet noticed our dark vehicle, among the dark shadows of the tall trees. Harriet floated behind us, but stopped at the edge of the weed-choked lawn. I can't go any farther than this, but if you need to get a hold of me, I'm always around the hollow tree, she informed us. We will speak with you later this evening or tomorrow night, Vince promised. We slipped into the car and drove down the road, mindful of police cars. I glanced over my shoulder at the property, and was in time to see Harriet fade into nothing.
So is she trapped on the property until we bury here?
I asked my partner. No. The ghost is trapped to the property on which they are buried, he explained. So does that mean the bones are still somewhere on the grounds? I guessed.
Yes.
And there's no way of using Harriet as a divining rod or pointer? Very little. The grounds are extensive, and if the bones are buried deep she may not feel a connection, he revealed.
So, what are we hoping to get from this solicitor guy?
And what is a solicitor? I asked him. A solicitor is an old term for an attorney, and I don't expect anything to come of this interview, unless he might inform us about the insignia and the boy's acquisition of the anti-supernatural items, Vince replied. In a few minutes, we reached Mephisto Street. It was an older part of the business district, where the buildings hardly rose above one floor, and most were made of aged and discolored bricks. The streetlights flickered, but usually kept up a steady light, and many of the shops were closed at the hour we arrived. Most had dim lights behind their large windows, and etchings of their business names on the glass. We putted past the shops until we found Bartlett's building, a small single-story brick structure with a large window beside the heavy wooden door. Another large window to the right of the front door had closed curtains and was dark. I was surprised to see the lights were still inside, and the curtains were opened. The window and lights revealed a small waiting room, with a few chairs against the left-hand wall, and a wall with a small window at the rear that separated the waiting room from the rest of the building. There was a door to the right of the window that allowed entrance to the rear. Vince parked the car and we approached the entrance. "Think we should knock?" I asked him. He answered by opening the door and stepping inside. I followed, and a small jingle of a bell overhead alerted the occupant to our presence. In a moment, a tall man of 60 appeared at the window in the rear wall and smiled at us. He wore a dark blue suit with spectacles on his face. His whitish hair was slicked back, and his large hands showed ink stains from notarizing documents. "Good evening. What can I do for you?" he asked us in a bright, cheerful voice. "We wish to discuss a client of yours, one Mr. Robert Morley," Vince told him. The man raised an eyebrow and slipped from the window. The side door opened, and he slipped into the waiting room and shut the opening behind him. "I'm afraid the attorney-client privilege means I can't speak about any personal matters, but might I ask why you're inquiring?" Vince stepped up to him and his glasses dropped. The vampire's red eyes stared into Bartlett's own, and the old man's body loosened and his eyes drooped. "We wish to know of Morley and his mother." Bartlett spoke in a mechanical-sounding voice. "Mrs. Morley is dead, but Bobby fears she still haunts him." "Is that why he has the spiritual protections in and around his cottage?" Vince questioned him. "Yes. He fears she will take his life, and he himself has discussed suicide many times to free himself of her influence," Bartlett explained. "Do you know where he purchased the anti-supernatural items?" The human shook his head. "No." "Has he acted strangely within the last week?" "Yes." "How so?" "I visited him 6 days ago, and noticed he had dirt from the basement on his shoes. When I asked him where he'd been, he refused to tell me, and he ordered me to leave. I have not been back." "And you know nothing of the body of Harriet Morley?" "Nothing but that it was never found." Vince frowned but held one of his hands in front of the man's face. He snapped his fingers and Bartlett swayed and clutched his head with one hand. The attorney glanced between our faces. What happened?" he asked us. "You have been very helpful," Vince replied. Bartlett blinked at us. "I have." "Yes, now we must bid you good night." Vince bowed his head and left. Thanks for the help," I added, and hurried after my partner. I found Vince waiting for me by the car. "Did he really help us?" I asked him. "Very little, but we have now confirmed the body has been missing since the last week," he pointed out. "That's great, but we still don't know where the body is, and our only lead turned out to be as dead as our client," I countered. "If the living cannot help us, then maybe the dead can, and that is why we must secure a dog capable of finding dead bodies," he replied. He slipped into the car, and I stepped up to his open window. "We're not going to go steal a police dog, are we?" I asked him. "No, we will be borrowing a parasquad dog," he revealed. "A parasquad dog? They have dogs?" I wondered. He started the engine. "Yes, but the night is marching on, and we must hurry if we're to put to rest our client this night." We drove to our usual manhole entrance, into the drudges of the supernatural society that lay beneath the city. The tunnels were lit with the torches, and I expected to see the hulking, shadowy figure of Officer Romero give us his customary greeting. I sidled up to Vince as we trudged through the dank tunnels. "So, how exactly are we going to get a parasquad dog? I mean, don't they need those for official paranormal business?" I asked him. "Officer Romero owns one of the beasts, and may allow us use of it," he explained. "Aha! You mean the officer we keep leaving high and dry with information?" I quipped.
The same, he agreed. I don't think that's going to make him want to hand over his dog.
Then perhaps information may be traded for the dog.
You're getting pretty desperate for the dog, aren't you?
We have no other leads, he reminded me. I sighed and let my shoulders droop.
Don't remind me.
Here we are on a case, and even your detective skills aren't up to the challenge. The detective work hasn't failed until we give up, he countered. A smile slipped onto my lips.
That's pretty optimistic coming from you.
He turned away from me, so he faced straight ahead. I must blame you for such thoughts. I straightened and grinned. I'll take the blame, and wear it like a badge of honor. We reached the underground city, and found it as lively as ever. Monsters walked to and fro on their shopping missions, and others plied their wares on the different levels or in the rows of shops. Unfortunately, there was still no sign of Romero. Think he's out on another beat? I asked my partner. Vince pursed his lips and shook his head.
No, but he may be on assignment.
Like he was in the underground? I guessed.
Yes, but we shall find the truth.
He led us to the station down the row of shops. At the front desk sat another zombie, and a few others worked behind him among the rows of desks, filing reports of phantoms and booking witches for illegal hexing. The zombie at the front desk glanced up from paperwork and glared at us.
How can I help you?
He asked in a brisk tone. We wish to speak with Officer Romero, Vince told him. The zombie officer's mood darkened, and his eyebrows crashed down. He's been given time off for bungling the stakeout in the underground. His cloudy eyes flickered between us.
It seems a vampire novice messed up the works.
Vince frowned but bowed his head and turned away. I glanced at Vince's retreating back to the zombie officer, and back.
Thanks for the help, I told the officer as I hurried after my partner.
I caught Vince outside where he stood in contemplation.
You know they make time off sound like a bad thing, I commented.
For a zombie, that is very bad. If they find the creature is more trouble than they are worth, then the spell keeping them alive will be revoked and they will die a permanent death, Vince explained. I furrowed my brow.
Is that such a bad thing?
I mean, Harriet wants to find peace. Don't the guys at the Para Squad want to get some eternal rest?
Some of them are proud of their jobs.
Romero is one of them, he replied. I ran a hand through my tied hair.
Just our luck.
We could have released 2 people, for the task of 1. Anyway, what kind of a dog are we getting from Romero that we can't find somewhere else? A dead one. I threw up my arms.
Why do I even bother asking?
Of course a zombie guy would have an undead dog. We will visit him at his home and see what we can find out, Vince suggested. He strode toward a different tunnel than that which we'd entered. I hurried after him. Wait, the zombies have homes? They don't live at the precinct? I asked him. That is correct, he confirmed.
So, where do they live exactly? At the outskirts of the sewers, he revealed. Sounds fashionable.
Why do they live there? I quipped. Zombies are less accepted than other creatures, he explained. Because they come to pieces in a fight? Because they have a foul odor. Some of the racism down here have the strangest origins, I mused as Vince led me into the depths of the sewers. Chapter 6. We wandered our way through the giant culverts. The farther we traveled, the fewer the torches until they stopped altogether. Without our vampiric sight, we would have been completely blind in the near darkness. Only slits of light through sewer drains allowed any light to shine into the damp, dank, drippy sewers.
Can't we go any place fashionable?
I muttered.
Such as the clothing store?
Vince quipped. I stuck out my tongue.
Hardy ha ha.
You just want to go back there to take a bite out of that employee again. Jealous? I turned away, folded my arms over my chest and pressed my lips in a pout. No. Vince stopped so quickly I rammed into his back. He didn't waver, but I fell back onto the cold, wet ground. Will you warn me when you do that? I have stopped, he warned me. I stood and tried to brush unmentionable trash off my rear and pants. Oh thanks, that really helps now. Why the sudden stop anyway? He gestured to a widening of the tunnel in front of us. We are here. Before us were the remains of an old subway station, complete with tracks and a platform. The tracks ran to our left and right, and on the other side of them was the platform. At the far side of the platform sat shanty houses made from discarded roofing material. Overhead was a glass ceiling where most of the glass was painted over with black, leaving only a few small holes to allow artificial light from a higher sublevel. The stairs were boarded shut and filled in with rocks. Above us, I could hear the rumble of trains as they made their way along used tracks. What really caught my attention, though, was the beautiful touches. The platform was tiled in white marble. The walls held mosaics formed from colored tiles, and many of the images depicted scenes from the Bible and ancient classics like the Iliad and the Odyssey. There was Odysseus sailing by the Sirens, and there was God booting Adam and Eve out of paradise. I stepped into the light and my mouth dropped open.
Wow, I whispered. Somebody really wanted this place to look good.
The zombies created the mosaics and laid the marble tile, Vince informed me. I swung around and stared at him with wide eyes. Really? They are undead but not uncreative, he scolded me. I gestured with both hands to the beautiful layout.
Yeah, but this.
It did take some years, but the effort was worth it, a voice commented. We swung around to find Romero standing behind Vince. Leave it to him to sneak up behind us at his home. I noticed he wasn't in his uniform, but in worn slacks with a faded white t-shirt. In one of his hands was a leash, and at his side was a dog much like him, rotting at the ribs and with filmy eyes. The dog took one whiff of our scents, and pulled back its rotten lips to show off 2 rows of surprisingly healthy teeth. Heel, Brutus, Romero hissed. The dog stopped growling and sat down, but its eyes never stopped glaring at us. Romero turned to us with a frown on his lips. What are you two doing here, anyway? Come to ruin another stakeout? We wish to borrow your dog, Vince told him. Romero scoffed.
And why should I do that?
Because you're a nice guy. I spoke up. As they say, nice guys finish last, he quoted. We heard you were given time off, Vince commented. Romero gave a nod.
Yeah, I was given time off.
I was blamed for the bungling of the stakeout at the Sea Slug. His eyes flickered to Vince. Someone attracted werewolves, and they alerted the buyers that danger was near, so they escaped.
We didn't mean to mess things up.
We just needed to find somebody, I defended us.
Well, you messed things up for me, and the higher-ups are debating whether to delife me, he revealed.
I blinked at him.
Delife you?
To extinguish his existence, Vince explained. Oh, the permanent death. But it was only one mistake, I argued. One big mistake, and there's a gluttony of zombies to use for the Force. They can use me as an example for the others without losing manpower, Romero told us. I cringed.
How do they do it?
They coat us with the blood of lambs. It purifies the body and forces our souls to rest, he explained. He hung his head and pushed past us with the dog at his side.
But what am I talking to you two for?
You won't help.
What must you do to atone for your mistake?
Vince spoke up. Romero froze and slowly looked over his shoulder. His eyes were wide, and he raised an eyebrow.
Why should you care?
I do not, but we are in need of your dog, Vince insisted. We do care, and it is kind of our fault you got into this mess, I admitted. Romero turned back to us, and looked from one of us to the other.
You're not pulling my leg off with this.
You really want to help?
Yes, Vince confirmed.
Romero rubbed his chin with his hand, and finally shrugged and dropped his arms to his side.
What do I have to lose?
If we fail, you're on life, Vince quipped. I jabbed him in the arm, but he didn't notice. What I need might cost you yours, Romero countered. I cringed.
What did you have in mind?
I asked him. The stakeout at the Sea Slug was to find the manufacturing facility for the books. If you two were to find it for me, then I could inform my bosses and avoid my permanent expulsion from the force and life, Romero explained. I tilted my head to one side and raised an eyebrow.
Wait, so you want us to find out where the books are being made and report back to you?
That's it. Romero's frown deepened. We've searched for months to find those books and we don't have a single lead. Not even a number in an address. When is your review hearing? Vince asked him. Tomorrow night. I sighed. And let me guess, you need us to find the place before the hearing?
Yes, Romero concurred.
I turned to Vince.
Mitch, he agreed.
Mitch? The guy at the boo bar? I wouldn't trust him with a dime, Romero spoke up. He is trustworthy if one has enough money, Vince argued. Yeah, real trustworthy, Romero quipped. We will have your information for you before the night is finished, and you will provide us with your dog. Is that a deal? Vince questioned him. Romero looked long and hard at Vince before he stuck out his hand for a shake.
It's a deal.
Vince shook his hand and turned down the tunnel we came. I made to follow, but Romero spoke to me. You must have a hell of an influence over him, because he's changed a lot lately.
I half turned to him and shrugged.
I guess all it took was some badgering to get him to be nice, I commented. A small smile slipped onto his lips. If the look in his eyes was of a badgered man, then there'd be fewer divorces. My damn cheeks blushed, and I stepped away from him toward the tunnel.
Yeah, well, maybe it's all this dim light.
You know, affects the eyes and stuff. Anyway, see you later. I waved to him and fled down the tunnel after Vince. I caught up to Vince 50 yards down the tunnel, and we walked silently for a few moments. I allowed my eyes to flicker up to Vince's stoic face, as he stared straight ahead. Romero's comment was the second time I'd heard somebody tell me Vince had changed because of my doing, Vera being the first person. I leaned closer to the vampire, and studied his features. He was always handsome, especially with those new grey streaks in his temple hairs, but I detected a hint of softening around the corners of his lips. There was also a certain playful glint in his eyes that hadn't been there before, but maybe that was some remnant from his brief time as a human.
What is it? He questioned me.
I squeaked and whipped my face away.
Nothing, I stuttered. You studied me.
What were you looking for? He persisted.
I was just thinking back to when we first met.
Not at the apartment, but at the warehouse where I learned what you really were. I just wanted to see if you'd changed. I do not age, he reminded me. I shook my head.
Not that way.
Just in the way you move and stuff. He paused and raised an eyebrow.
And what have you found?
I shrugged.
I'm not sure.
I guess you just look nicer, but that could just be me because I know underneath that cold skin you're just a big softie. Vince's eyebrow raised higher so it nearly brushed against his hairline.
Softie?
Yeah. A couple of people said they think you've changed, and I was just seeing if I could see it, I explained. Vince pursed his lips and turned away. I see. I lightly grasped his arm.
That wasn't an insult or anything.
It makes you look a lot cuter, handsomer, nicer without all that scowling. You know, more approachable, I soothed him. Damn me, and my stuttering over his good looks. I blushed and escaped his detection when I looked at my feet and lowered my voice to a whisper.
I think you look better.
I jumped when he wrapped his hand atop mine, and my head whipped up. Vince still faced away from me, but his tense face had relaxed. For the first time I saw what the others had seen, a man who lay just beneath the cold surface of that undead exterior. I accept your compliment, Vince whispered in return. He shook myself and let his hand that held mine fall. But this is no time for such sentimentalities. We have been hired to complete several tasks, and none of them are easy. He pulled from my grasp and strode down the tunnel. I was left not without guilt or confusion, but with the idea that, as Vince walked away from me, I was seeing a man in the last throes of denial. He was even cuter when he fought against the impossible. Chapter 7. I hurried to catch up to his long strides, but halfway to my partner something slithered from a side passage and grabbed me. Vince. I barely had time to yell, before a cold three-fingered hand gagged my mouth. Vince lay 20 yards ahead of me, and I saw him swing around before a dozen shadowy forms emerged from the darkness between us. They appeared to peel themselves off the very walls and nooks of the tunnel, and I could see their skin that wasn't covered in short shirts and pants was a dark red, like the color of old blood. Horns protruded from their heads, and from the backs of their pants swung a thin tail that ended in a point. They all had 3 fingers on their hands, and 3 toes on their bare feet. Their eyes glowed a bright yellow that illuminated the ground in front of them. Etched deeply into their skin like tattoos was the mark of the supernatural syndicate. They scurried across the ground toward Vince as quiet as church mice, but for the wisp of wind that emanated from their quick movements. Vince ran forward and met his opponents halfway. He ducked down to avoid a swinging fist by the lead creature, and when he stood he lifted the thing by the chest and tossed it into its fellow creatures. The others climbed over and dodged their dazed companions, and dove at Vince. He disappeared beneath a doggy pile of red skin and cracking tails. I struggled in the grasp of my captor, but their hold was surprisingly strong. Still, I noticed they all appeared to be male. I lifted one leg and jammed it backward into the creature's crotch. The thing let out a high-pitched howl and its hold loosened. I jumped forward, swung around, and punched him in the side of the face while he was down. The thing crumpled to the ground, but he was still conscious. I heard a howl of rage, and turned in time to see Vince burst from the pile of creatures. Our opponents flew in all directions, but each one landed on all fours, even on the walls. They pushed off from where they landed and dove at Vince. He socked, kicked and ducked the creatures, and made his escape to where I stood. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into a side tunnel, with the creatures in hot pursuit.
What are those things?
I yelled. Devils, he replied. That explained the tails. Great. Got any holy water on you? I quipped. No, nor lamb's blood, he returned.
So how do we deal with these things?
Decapitation. I stuck out my tongue, but our running meant I bit down a little hard when Vince yanked me into a small brick alcove that held a maintenance ladder. At the top was a covered manhole, but the dim artificial light told me it didn't lead to the freedom of the streets.
Climb, he ordered me.
I hurried up the rungs, but paused halfway and glanced over my shoulder. Beneath us the devils forsook the ladder, and instead used their nimble fingers to catch the tiny crevices between the bricks, and climb up the walls after us. I yelped and climbed faster with Vince at my tail. At the top I shoved the manhole upward and over with my shoulder, and stuck my head out. A train barreled toward me, and I ducked down in time to avoid my own decapitation. The short train passed in a split second, and Vince shoved me onto the tracks. He followed and jammed the manhole back into place. His strength caused the manhole to bend and warp in its hole, biding us some time. The creatures scratched and clawed at the manhole. Apparently, we didn't have that much time. I took a step forward to escape, but Vince grasped my shoulder and pulled me back.
Don't touch the tracks.
The voltage may kill you, he advised.
What?
I yelped. He pursed his lips and swept me into his arms just as the manhole flew upward from its resting place. Vince took off down the tracks, and I glanced over his shoulder in time to watch the devils scramble out on all fours like slithering snakes. They rushed after us, and the distance between us shortened. Must go faster. Must go faster. I shouted. Vince didn't increase his speed, though I knew from previous experience that he could have gone faster. They're catching. I rephrased. A sound in front of us caught my attention, and I looked ahead to see an oncoming subway train. We sprinted along the same tracks. Another blaring horn behind us, told me the other track was occupied by another train. We were trapped between a fast rock and a speeding hard place. Any ideas? I shouted at my partner.
Hold on to me, he ordered me.
I wrapped my arms around his neck, and he released me so that my legs swung down in front of him. Vince knelt and snatched 2 pieces of rusted metal from between the tracks. I watched the rear train and the devils race toward us. They weren't as fast as the train, so the machine barreled toward them and us. Vince stepped calmly between the tracks as the first train swept past us. We were blocked on one side, and the second train passed our enemies and flew past us. The wind from the long rows of passenger cars tried to blow us over, but Vince pressed his feet into the hard ground. My hair whipped to and fro, as the trains fought to see which would toss us into the other. The devils didn't dare jump onto the walls of the trains, and the small space between them meant they slithered in single file toward us. The lead devil slid his lips back and showed off a row of sharp, pointy teeth, and he flexed his claws. They were 10 yards and closing. I turned away and buried my face into Vince's coat.
This is not how I imagined dying, I muttered.
Do not lose faith in me, Vince whispered. I whipped my head up to look into his face. His eyes stared unblinkingly at our oncoming opponents, and his lips were pressed into a thin line. There was such determination and cunning in those bright red eyes that my doubt was swept away. My eyes roamed down to his hands, which tightly grasped the dagger like pieces of metal. I heard a cruel deep chuckle, and turned my head. The devils closed the gap between us to 5 yards, and the lead paused. Nowhere to run, vampire, it crowed. A sly grin slipped onto Vince's lips. We had no intention of running. Vince slammed one of the pieces of metal into the side of the right-hand train that traveled from us to our enemies. The metal stuck fast and was propelled toward the devils. The lead one had time to widen his eyes before the metal sliced into his neck. It cut his head clean off, along with the heads of half the others who were just as unprepared for the attack. The other half at the back ducked beneath the impromptu sword, but Vince anticipated their movements in the confined space, and slammed the second piece of metal lower so it sat at their new neck height. The metal divorced the remaining devils from their heads, and body and head collapsed to the ground. The dead flesh touched the electrified tracks, and brilliant flashes of light jolted through their corpses. They hopped and jumped, until the charred remains jumped off the tracks and onto the narrow gap between the trains. The end of the trains swept by us, and all was quiet and calm. You can release me, Vince spoke up. I turned to him, and noticed my arms had a death grip around his neck. Hey, sorry, I replied as I sheepishly grinned and slid to the ground. Vince stepped past me and over to the smoking remains. Head and body were barely recognizable as a humanoid thing, and the smell that wafted from them smelled like rotten eggs. I followed Vince and pinched my nose shut. You know, we never did find out why they wanted to kill us, I mused. Vince knelt down beside one of the corpses. No, but they made a grave mistake by attacking us, Vince commented. You mean besides us sending them to their graves? I returned. Yes. They showed us we are on the correct path. Path? Path to where? He brushed his hand over one of the tattoos. To the leader of the syndicate. I sighed. But we're not after the syndicate, I pointed out. Vince stood and brushed his hand on his coat. Have you forgotten the insignia left in the dirt in the Morley basement? I furrowed my brow and recalled of what he spoke. So you think what? That they might have hid Harriet's body? Perhaps, but we can now be certain they have a hand in this affair, he mused. I ran a hand through my hair and shook my head. Just great. Devils and ghosts and zombie dogs. What next? Niche. Chapter 8. A few minutes later, we returned to the underground city, where Vince led us to the Boo Bar. The place was hopping tonight, and not just because I spotted some frog people at the far back. Most of the tables were full, even those around Mitch's usual seat. He himself sat at his table with a drink in front of him, and his notepad open in his hand. We stopped at his table and stood by his side. Even if Vince wanted to break with tradition and sit down, all the chairs around Mitch's table were taken. Mitch glanced up from his notepad, smiled, and shut the front cardboard cover. He leaned against his chair and glanced between our faces.
Well, if it isn't my favorite two customers.
What can I do for you today?
Not in costume?
I asked him. He shrugged. They're all at the cleaners, and the new ones are on order. Besides, going incognito as myself is a pretty nice change, but let's get down to business. What were you wanting? Where the best meal can be found in the underground. Info on where Riven takes his laundry. We require information on the location of the book production facility, Vince told him. Mitch's joking demeanor slid off his face and he sat up.
You're joking, right?
Vince just stared at him and Mitch sighed. All right, you're not joking, but even if I knew where it was, and I'm not saying if I do or don't, that wouldn't be something I'd sell to you no matter how much money you offered me.
Why not?
I asked him. Because I'd be dead before I'd get to enjoy the loot. I heard one of the larger syndicates is managing that place, and I don't want to end up running out of life before I run out of costumes, he quipped.
This wouldn't happen to be the supernatural syndicate, would it?
I wondered. He raised an eyebrow.
What if it is? Well, we just kicked some of their.
What if we provided you with protection? Vince spoke up. Mitch snorted and pulled out a small spray bottle from inside his coat. Inside was a thick red liquid. I've got my own protection, at least for a couple of the little guys. A bottle of sludge is going to protect you? I quipped. He rolled his eyes. This isn't sludge, it's lamb's blood. Guaranteed to cure a bad case of the devil. He leaned back, clasped the sides of his coat and grinned at us. And it helps that I can smell those devils a mile away. Vince nodded at the bottle. May I see that? He requested. Mitch raised an eyebrow, but handed over the spray bottle.
Sure, but even you'd better be careful with that.
Vince turned to a neighboring table that held 4 human-looking men talking among themselves. He turned the spray bottle on their table and sprayed a healthy dose over the group. I expected protestations, but instead the men jumped up and screamed in agony. Their flesh, along with the spell that created the human features over their real bodies, melted away to reveal 4 devils. They clawed at the blood that covered their bare flesh, but that only spread the liquid to their hands. The whole boobar jumped from their seats and scurried away from the frantic 4, and the splatters of blood they flung. The ever-watchful eye glared at the disturbance, but the wild dance of death didn't last long. The blood consumed their flesh in less than 10 seconds, and the devils dropped to the floor as piles of bones mixed with clothes. Vince turned to Mitch, who sat in his chair with his mouth agape.
You were saying?
Mitch straightened and cleared his throat. I was saying that I might need your protection, just until I figure out what these guys wanted. They wished our death, Vince explained.
But how did they know we were going to be here and get here before us?
I pointed out. They must have overheard our conversation with Romero, Vince guessed. A grin slipped onto Mitch's face. If they were after you, then I guess they've got nothing on me, and I don't need your. Vince slammed the spray bottle on the table in front of Mitch. Your blood killed men of the syndicate. They will want revenge on you as well as us unless you help us find the factory and distract them with greater problems, Vince commented. Mitch's mouth dropped open. You're seriously blackmailing me?
Very seriously, Vince confirmed.
Mitch pursed his lips and snatched his spray bottle. He stuffed it into his coat and stood. Fine, but I'm not going to forget. Vince held out a roll of $100 bills. Mitch automatically snatched the roll and stuffed it into his coat. Already forgotten.
Now let's step into my office.
We moved our conversation to the quieter quarters behind the rear door of the boo bar. Mitch spun on his heels and faced us.
All right, what did you need to know?
The location of the book facility, Vince reminded him. Mitch tilted his head back and rubbed his chin.
Well, I don't really know the location myself, but I know somebody who probably does.
We may probably not keep you safe if you cannot find the location for us, Vince quipped. Mitch held up his hands. Fine. I'm really sure my source knows where the facility is, but the bigger problem is my source doesn't owe me any favors, so you'll have to think of some way of getting the info out of them. Oh, and a fair warning, my source doesn't take kindly to blackmail. Lead us to your source and we will deal with the problem of leverage, Vince ordered him. We're going to need your ride. It's uptown, Mitch informed us. We returned to our vehicle, and Mitch gave us directions to one of the side streets off a fashionable district. Clubs decked both sides of the road with their neon signs that flashed advertisements for dancing and ladies of the night. Crowds of people in bright clothes with dyed hair and sunglasses lined and walked the sidewalks searching for a few good memories to line their ordinary lives. Mitch sat in the passenger seat while I was stuck between the men. Our guest rider pointed at an alley beside a 4-story brick building, with a neon sign advertising a snake. There. Go into that alley and park in back, he directed Vince. I looked at the sign as Vince turned us into the dark, narrow alley. Immortal reptile? I read around. It refers to the legend that snakes shed their skins and stay immortal, Mitch explained. The alley came out on a wide road in the center of the city block. A dozen parking spaces were on our left behind the immortal reptile, and Vince took the last empty spot. Mitch stepped out and we followed. He nodded at the rear of the building, and I noticed there was a wide metal rung staircase that led downward to a thick metal basement door. The humans go through the front, but those in the know go to the basement, Mitch explained. Mitch guided us down the stairs and he unlocked it with a thick large black key. He opened the door, and we got our first glimpse of the basement. The large square musty room held crates and empty boxes that were stacked to the ceiling. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and rats scurried to their hiding places. To our right was the stairs that led to the ground floor.
Those poor human saps don't know what they're missing, I quipped.
Mitch walked over to the far left side of the basement, where sat a pile of heavy-looking wooden crates. He turned to us with a grin.
No, they don't.
Mitch rapped on the side of the stack of crates, and the pile slid away from him to reveal another staircase. Bright, colorful lights erupted from the lower room and illuminated the basement. Mitch gestured to the stairs. After you. Vince led the way down the stairs and I followed close behind him. We reached the bottom and beheld a room the size of 3 city blocks. The room was built like a coliseum, with large circular tiers that led down to a center square platform. The tiers were 10 yards wide except for the top on which we stood, and they dropped down 6 feet for each level. The top tier was 20 yards wide, and the rear walls were covered in slot machines. The tiers below the top held lounge chairs and dining tables, and the areas closest to the center platform were filled with row upon row of theater seats. Stairs connected each platform, and allowed the clientele to move freely among each other. The atmosphere was bohemian, in how everyone mixed with everyone else. At the slots, people in suits sat next to hobos, and among the lounge areas were middle-class monsters talking to rich and poor alike. The only thing more unusual than the mingling was the clientele themselves. Every possible creature from more nightmares than I could dream were gathered here in this strange amphitheater of fun. There were harpies, mummies, skeletons, slug creatures, and a myriad of other nightmares. They slithered, crawled, walked, and flew around the Colosseum like it was a football game, and every tier was a new tailgate party. Every creature was represented but vampires. Besides Vince, I didn't notice any other pale face with red eyes. What I did notice was that most of the attention in the Colosseum was focused on the lowest tier. Atop the center platform sat a giant metal cage, and inside the cage I could just make out 2 individuals duking it out. The crowd in the seats yelled and screamed as their favorite or adversary fell or won in the square ring. The opponents growled and snarled at one another, and even from this distance I saw they weren't humans but large mythical creatures. One was a sphinx, and the other was a minotaur, and between them was a very bloody ring floor. I jerked my thumb at the Colosseum. Is this legal?
No, Vince replied. But it's a hell of a lot of fun, Mitch spoke up.
He nodded at the wall opposite where we stood. I could barely see a door guarded by a gruff-looking stone golem thing that stood in the closed doorway. We need to get in there, he told me. Mitch guided us around the perimeter of the Colosseum and over to the guarded door. He smiled at the 7-foot-tall golem, but the creature stared back at us with depthless black eyes and his puffy rock lips pressed together in a perpetual frown. He wore only pants, and the lack of clothes showed off his rock muscles. We want to see Lamia, Mitch told the guard. The golem's voice was deep and gravelly. Do you have an appointment? The guard asked Mitch.
No, but I'm an old friend.
You just tell her Mitch is here to see her, Mitch instructed him. The golem half turned and pressed his fat finger against a large button below an intercom.
Lady Lamia?
What is it? A smooth, silky female voice answered. A man named Mitch wishes to see you. There was a derisive snort.
Tell him he can't have the pleasure.
Tell her Vincent wishes to speak with her, Vince spoke up. His voice was loud and clear, and the golem held down his voice button when Vince made the suggestion. I heard a small chuckle from the other end of the line.
Well, if it isn't Trouble himself.
Let them in, Rocky. Rocky released the button and stepped away from the door. The door slid into the wall and revealed a staircase that led 50 feet up to a landing, and at that landing was another doorway. The left wall held torches that were the only source of light in the narrow stairwell. Into the lair of the monster, I heard Mitch mutter. He turned to us with an uneasy smile and gestured to the stairs. Ladies first. Chapter 9. I looked to Vince and nodded at the stairs. You heard what the man said. Get up there. Vince's eyes narrowed, and he proceeded up the stairs. I followed, and Mitch was behind me. We reached the landing, and I noticed an insignia of a coiled snake on the entrance. Vince knocked on the door. Come in, called the female voice. Vince opened the door, and we were presented with a view of a snazzy office that sat 3 floors above the street and overlooked the fashionable human district. Humans strode beneath the large windows that stood opposite us, and between the door and the windows was a thick oak desk. On the other side of the desk in a high-backed black chair sat a beautiful woman of 25, with long flowing red hair and a sly smile. She wore a slim business suit and small thin bangles around her wrists. The woman gestured to a few seats in front of the desk.
Please have a seat, she offered.
Vince led us to the chairs, and I noticed the office had a large amount of plants on the left and right walls that was enough to create a humid climate. The temperature was also set to 80 degrees, and I tried not to fidget under the heat as we took our seats. The woman leaned over the desk and set her chin on her clasped hands. Her eyes were focused on Vince.
It's been a long time, Vincent.
You should visit me more often, she cooed. My eyes flickered to him, and I couldn't help when my lips pursed together. Do you not know any of the ladies in this town? I whispered. We're very old friends, he and I, the woman spoke up. We came here to request your help, Vince told her. The woman sighed and leaned back in her chair. So I supposed, but what can I do for a detective? Mitch tells us you may know where Riven's book manufacturing facility is located, he explained. The woman raised an eyebrow, and her eyes flickered to Mitch. Her tone added a slight hiss to her words. Did he now? He should learn to keep his trap shut for once. Mitch grinned and shrugged.
What can I say? You can say nothing, she shot back.
The deed is done and we wish to know the location, Vince spoke up. The woman folded her arms and shrugged. But I don't wish to reveal that little secret. It's very valuable to me, and you're asking for it. Just raise the price. To what? He questioned her. 5 million. I choked on the number. 5 million? That's robbery. Who do you think you are? I protested. The woman set her hands palms down on the desk and stood. And stood. And stood. She stretched up and revealed that below the waist her body was that of a snake. The tip of her tail slid along the side of the desk and slapped itself at me. Her long lithe form towered 4 feet above us and she glared at me. I am Lamia, little girl, and I don't care to take lip from some half-dead human masquerading as a supernatural, she growled. I blinked at her.
Half-dead,
I repeated. We didn't come here to trade barbs. We don't have that money on us, and we are short on time. Is there something we can trade you for? Vince suggested. Lamia scoffed and slid back into her chair.
What could you possibly offer me?
A favor for a favor, Vince replied. Lamia turned her lip up in a snarl.
That's no way to run a business. Then what about a bet?
Mitch spoke up. Lamia raised an eyebrow.
You have my attention.
Mitch nodded at Vince and me. These two are against your best fighter in the ring. No weapons of any kind, just brutal hand-to-hand combat. Lamia slipped a slender finger across her chin for a moment. She nodded at Vince's ring hand.
What about his ring? She pointed out.
We'll consider that a part of himself, like those lovely bracelets on your wrists, Mitch suggested. I took another look at the bracelets, and started back when one of them unwound to reveal themselves as small, brightly colored snakes. Lamia petted the snake with her finger, and it curled up again as a bracelet. Her sly smile slithered back onto her lips.
It's a deal.
My best fighter against these two. If you win, I will tell you the location of the facility, but if I win, I get to keep Vincent as my plaything. I stood so fast that I knocked my chair over and startled her tail.
Oh, hell no.
No deal. I protested. Vince stood and grabbed my arm.
There is no other choice, he insisted.
I yanked my arm from his grasp and gestured to Lamia. It isn't worth you being a slave to a snake. A snake? Lamia growled. We will not lose, Vince argued.
And if we do?
I countered. Lamia laughed and stood. Then I get Vincent all to myself, and judging by your reaction, I'd say that would be the perfect revenge for your insult towards me. My victory will be even sweeter when you learn your opponent. Mitch stood and positioned himself between me and the snake. All I wanted to do was strangle her thin neck, and make her into a purse. Easy there, ladies. Liz, you need to save your energy for the ring, he reminded me. I pushed the murderous thoughts of a new handbag from my mind, and marched out of the room. Vince followed while Mitch stayed behind for a while longer. I stomped down the stairs and stopped outside the door. The guard golem raised a rocky eyebrow at me.
What are you looking at?
I growled. Vince saved me from a pounding as he swept down the stairs and grasped my upper arms. He led me away from the door, and the golem that pounded its fist into its other large hand. A moment, if you will, he requested. I shrugged off his hands and spun around to glare at him.
What the hell was that back there?
You're just going to give yourself up to that snake charmer up there? We will not lose, he repeated.
And what if we do lose, huh?
Where am I at? Where are we at? I argued. Vince raised an eyebrow, and his blood-red eyes scrutinized my face.
Where are we at? He wondered.
I froze and blushed under his thorough gaze. Well, we're partners, and partners aren't supposed to leave each other. And my eyes flickered down to my ringing hands, and I held up my ring between us.
And besides that, we're stuck together, remember?
Till death do us part. Well, sort of. And if you go off and be the slave of that thing up there, then something bad might happen and Vince stepped up to me less than a foot in front of me, and his nearness shut me up. I turned my face so I didn't have to look at him. Look at me, he demanded. I'm fine, I quipped. Vince's cool fingers grasped my chin and he forced me to look at him. His glasses slid down his nose and his red eyes drilled into mine, but I didn't see any anger or annoyance in the depths.
This troubles you greatly.
Well, yeah, I agreed. He slightly tilted his head, and his half-lidded eyes raised their brows in question. Why? Well, because it kind of affects me too. I mean, it affects both of us, and I froze when Vince's smooth fingers slid up to cup my cheek. My blushing skin warmed his, and I was mesmerized by his beautiful glowing eyes. Whatever emotions you feel for me are clouding your judgment. We have never lost, and we will not lose now, he persisted.
But, Liz, have faith in me, he pleaded.
My eyes widened.
That was only the second time he'd spoken my name.
His red eye pleaded for my approval. I pressed my lips together, but sighed and nodded. All right, but if you get me killed, I swear I'll beat the crap out of you in the netherworld. Vince smiled and let his hand slip from my cheeks. I missed the coolness of his fingers. I will risk the punishment. Good, so where do we sign up to get ourselves killed by Miss Snake's champion? Go down to the cage. Lamia's already called down there and given instructions to stop the other matches and let you in, Mitch told us as he stepped from the stairway. There was such a gloomy, desolate expression on his face that I gulped. Who or what are we up against? I asked him. He closed his eyes and shook his head.
That's something Lamia warned me on pain of death not to tell, until you see for yourselves.
Vince set his hand on my shoulder, and a small sly smile slipped onto his lips.
Let us see the challenger.
I grinned. Yeah, maybe I can improve my batting average with a 2-0 streak. We walked down the stairs that led to the bottom of the Colosseum. Speakers around the facility crackled overhead, and the voice of a male announcer boomed over the sound system. The fight schedule has been changed. The fight between Sneezy Simeon and Freddie Freuder will be held tomorrow, and in its place will be Vincent and Liz Stokes against a mystery challenger. There was a collective gasp from the audience, and the lights dimmed in the entire arena. We stopped and I cringed when a spotlight shone on us. Thousands of eyes turned on us, and a great buzzing of exclamations and whispers arose from the onlookers. I glanced at Vince, but he stared straight ahead with his lips pursed together, the picture of stoic indifference. I'm guessing since they only used your first name, that you're known to practically everybody, I whispered. A great many, he agreed. Mitch got us going with a push down the stairs. Come on, you two.
Let's not let the nice people wait for your creaming.
I turned and glared at him, as we made our way to the metal cage. Thanks, Mitch. It's great to know you have that much faith in us. Mitch shrugged. Faith can move mountains, but you don't need to move mountains in the cage. You need to perform a miracle. We reached the lowest tier where sat the cage. A short flight of wooden stairs on opposite sides of the cage led to doors made of metal pipes. There was no other way to get in or out of the cage. A golem stood beside the bottom of the stairs, and when we the steps on the right, the golem pressed a button behind him. The cage door swung open. Good luck. You'll need it, Mitch quipped. I gulped, but Vince walked straight ahead and up the stairs into our doom, the cage. I followed, and when I stepped inside the cage, the door swung shut behind me with a loud clang. The crowds hushed as the lights dimmed to nothing. Only those pointed at the ring remained on, and I sweltered beneath the heat. Vince stood as still as a statue, but I could tell he was tense. I stiffened when the door opposite us swung open, but I couldn't see our challenger. The crowd collectively held their breath. Then I heard it. A strange swooshing noise as something soft swept against the hard ground of the stairs. In a moment, a tall shadow rose above the bottom of the ring, and our opponent slithered into the ring. It was Lamia herself, and she had the widest, most wicked grin on her face that I'd ever seen. The crowd went wild to see the mistress of the ring actually in the ring. Vince stepped back and set his arm over me to push me behind him. I'm guessing this isn't good, I whispered. No. Chapter 10. Lamia's metal door clanged shut behind her, and she raised her clawed hands in the air. The crowd cheered, and behind us I heard Mitch hiss under his breath. I have a special treat for you, my precious clients, Lamia announced to the audience. They quieted to listen to her voice, and she gestured to us with one hand. These fighters have challenged me to a duel not to the death, but to the finish. For those of you who do not know the rules, a duel to the finish is when one side admits defeat. If death occurs before one side admits defeat, then, she paused and shrugged, c'est la vie. The crowd roared with approval, at her death is nothing attitude. She had the home team advantage, but we still had each other.
What's the best way to kill a snake?
I whispered to Vince.
Not to let her know you're going to kill her, Lamia quipped from across the ring.
Her 20-foot-long tail slithered in front of her, and I noticed there were sharp, thick barbs that stretched to near the tip.
But I'm not here to play to the death.
I want my little Vincent alive, or as alive as he ever is. I leapt forward from the safety of Vince's back and rolled my sleeves up. He's not yours and he's not going to be yours. I growled. Lamia raised herself so she stood 8 feet tall and beckoned me. Then show me you deserve him. I barely inched forward before a flash of darkness swept past me and at Lamia. It was Vince, and he slammed a hard right and left into Lamia's gut. She doubled over and clutched her gut, but she quickly slithered back out of his reach. Her eyes blazed with anger. You will pay for that, vampire. I will make you massage every scale you injure, she hissed. Lamia's tail whipped forward and snapped at Vince. He jumped back, but her tail was too fast, and in mid-leap she coiled herself around his legs. She slammed his back to the ground, and I heard a few bones crunch under the impact. I rushed forward to help my partner, but Lamia tossed some of her bracelets at me. The trinkets uncoiled themselves into their true snaky forms, and landed a yard in front of me and between me and Vince. They reared up and unfurled their hoods to show themselves as some sort of pygmy cobras. You've got to be kidding me, I quipped. I backed up, but the snakes followed. They snapped and bit at me, but only in the air in front of me. They didn't actually want to kill me, any more than Lamia wanted to kill Vince, because she knew she'd lose her prize trophy if I died. Being stuck to her prize as I was, emboldened me to try something very reckless. I stopped my retreat and tried to stomp on the snakes. They slithered away from my foot, but only a short distance, where they stopped and hissed at me. Hiss yourselves. I shot back and marched onward. They retreated, and I came closer to the battle between Lamia and Vince. Vince's fight with the big snake Kuna wasn't going quite as well as mine with the mini Lamius. Lamia still held onto his feet, and his arms couldn't reach her tail to unwind himself from her grasp. She lifted him off the floor, and held him upside down in front of her. She curled her lips back in a wide grin and revealed sharp dripping fangs. You are much easier to defeat than I thought, my little vampire. Perhaps you aren't the treat I thought you were, she cooed. Vince's lips were pressed together in pain, but a sly smile slipped onto his lips. I wished you to bring me closer. Lamia's eyes widened just in time for Vince to swing toward her and slam his fists into both of them. She howled and clutched her eyes. Her tail loosened its grip, and Vince dropped elegantly onto his feet. He rushed her for more blows, but her tail swiped at him with its barbs and several cut through his coat and shirt. Blood oozed from his chest and he clutched his wounds. Lamia slithered forward and snapped her wide jaws at him, but he managed to dodge her fangs only to drop into the clutches of her tail. It was as though he were fighting two creatures at the same time, and the taily one managed to wrap itself around his chest and pin his arms to his sides. Lamia lifted him off the ground, and squeezed him until his blood dripped from between her tail folds. She slammed him against first one side of the cage and then the other. Each time more blood poured onto her tail and the ground, leaving a bloody trail to commemorate her winning. You can't do anything with that pathetic ring and human attached to you, can you, vampire? Lamia mocked him. I stood 5 yards off and watched this bloody show in horror. Vince struggled to free his ring hand, but she kept a tight hold on his arm so he couldn't wield it. I grasped mine in both hands and a bright light shone from the stone. Lamia whipped her head to me and snarled. I grinned in return. He's not the only one who can use this thing, I informed her. But if I tear off your finger he will be, she quipped. Vince remained in her tail while her front half slithered toward me in fast winding movements. I ducked down and raised a barrier just as her snapping jaws swooped down on me. Her teeth hit the barrier, and much was my horror when they sank deep into the light. She pulled herself free, but left gaping holes in the barrier. She chuckled at my shocked expression. "You think those rings make you invincible? They are only as strong as the person who wields them, and you are not strong." She hissed and barreled down on me for a barrier-breaking blow. A half-inch from the barrier she stopped, and let out a blood-curdling scream. She whipped her head to face behind her, and I followed her gaze. Vince was still trapped in her tail, but he had sank his teeth through her scales and deep into her flesh. He gobbled up as much of her blood as his mouth would allow, but 2 streams of blood still poured from the large puncture marks of his canine teeth. "You bloody vampire! Release me," she demanded. She turned away from me to pry Vince loose, but I jumped on her scaly back and clung to the stiff, thick plates. Vince must have had a hell of a bite to dig through those things. Lamia roared in anger and reared back, but I held onto the bucking bronco and climbed up to her head and arms. I became as a cat battling a snake, as I tore at her clothes, clawed at her eyes and beat off her flailing hands. Her flailing lessened in intensity, as Vince drained her of her energy. In a minute, she clutched her head and swayed to and fro. Her grip on Vince loosened and he dropped to the ground. I dove off as the snake woman fell forward and crashed belly first onto the ground. Vince slid forward and caught me in his arms. He pulled us away, and turned us around so we could admire our handiwork. Lamia lay flat on the ring floor, and her scaly skin was pale from her loss of blood. Her eyes were half-lidded, and her arms flapped at her sides in a failed attempt to rise. Her little snakelings slithered up to her, and stopped her bleeding wounds with their bodies, while others rubbed themselves against her cheeks to soothe her. A bell rang overhead and the crowd went wild. There were cheers, whistles, and even the occasional rose made it through the metal bars and to our feet. Vince set me down and bowed, and I followed suit. The lights turned on, and illuminated the raptured audience. Mitch stood by our cage door with a huge grin on his face and clapped. Lamia's door swung open, and the stone golem that guarded her office stomped inside. Rocky walked over to his mistress, and hefted her long form over his shoulder. The creatures stomped from the arena, and up the stairs to her office. The smaller snakes slithered up the stairs after them. Our door opened and Mitch strode inside. "Bravo. Bravo. That's using your teeth and claws." Mitch complimented us. He sidled up beside us, and nodded at Lamia's retreating limp figure.
"Let's just hope you didn't drain her bad enough that she can't tell you what you want to know."
We will see," Vince replied. There was something not quite right about Vince's stutter, and I glanced at his face. It was as white as a cotton sheet, and he swayed a little. I caught his arm and held him still. "What's wrong?" I asked him. "It is nothing," Vince answered. Mitch leaned toward Vince and raised an eyebrow. "Nothing, my ass. I bet you drank a little too much of her venomous blood, didn't you?" "Venomous blood?" I repeated. Mitch nodded. Lamia's blood contains toxins that are deadly to humans and supernaturals. Vince here is lucky he wasn't killed outright. "I am fine," Vince argued, but his legs buckled and he leaned his greater weight against me. "Yeah, fine," I quipped as I held him up. I swung one of his arms over my shoulder, and was surprised when Mitch took the other. "I can carry him," I told him. Mitch grinned and nodded at the crowds. "I know, but I couldn't ask for better advertising than this." Chapter 11. We hefted Vince up the stairs, and back to the entrance to Lamia's office. The door to the stairs was open, and the golem was gone. We found him and his mistress in the office. She lay on a reclining couch among the plants. A damp towel lay over her pale forehead, and the little snakes were busy bandaging her wounds with gauze and wrapping. The golem stood by her side, and glared at us as we entered. Lamia was conscious, though her voice was weak, and she waved off her guard. "It's fine, Rocky. Go back down and guard the door." The golem grudgingly tromped past us and down the stairs. Lamia gestured to the chairs. "Have a seat, Victors." Mitch and I dragged Vince to one of the chairs, and hefted him into the seat. He straightened as well as he could, and Lamia admired him with her eyes. You must be desperate to know the location of that facility, to drink my blood. I've killed dozens of weaker vampires with just a drop.
Fortunately, I am not a weak vampire, he quipped.
She smiled. No, you're not, and that's why I wanted you, but I suppose a bet is a bet. She waved a hand at her desk. The location is in the center bottom drawer, inside a greeting card. I meant to visit it at one time, but I imagine I won't get that chance now, will I? Mitch walked around the desk and retrieved the card. No, Vince agreed. Lamia sighed and shrugged. Oh well. A little less competition in the illegal racket market won't harm my business. Now be off with you before I change my mind and have my golems crush you. Vince stood on his own and bowed low at the waist to our hostess. We thank you for your assistance. Lamia smiled and waved him off.
None of your suaveness, vampire.
Just get out of here before I become even more jealous of this half-dead human. Vince bowed his head and led Mitch and me from the room. Something Lamia said stuck in my mind, and when we reached the open coliseum I sidled up to him. We walked around the perimeter towards the basement entrance.
What's she mean by half-dead human?
Is that because of me becoming a part vampire or something?
Something like that, he admitted.
Mitch joined us and scrutinized Vince. You sure you don't need to go to a witch doctor to have a look at your blood? I know a good one downtown, though the directions will cost you. I rolled my eyes and pushed him away. Don't you ever think about anything but money? I growled. My life, which is far more important than money, he returned. He became distracted when we passed a lounge of beautiful catwomen who were clad in loincloths and bikinis. Speaking of life, I'm sure you won't need me for getting yourselves killed at this facility place, so I'll just take my leave. He stepped down the stairs, but I grabbed his arm and yanked him back.
Aren't you forgetting something?
I asked him. He blinked at me.
I don't think so.
I held out my palm to him. Fork over the greeting card. Mitch sheepishly grinned, pulled the card from his jacket and set it in my hand. You can hardly blame me for keeping it. That information is worth $5 million.
Aha! Now you can go have your fun, I replied as I shoved him toward the catwomen.
Vince waited for me a few yards ahead, and I waved the card at him.
So what do we do now?
I asked him. We will confirm the location ourselves and call upon Romero tonight with our findings, Vince explained. My shoulders sagged and I sighed.
No rest for the wicked, huh?
He smiled.
Not tonight.
I leaned toward him and frowned at his pale face.
You sure you don't need a break?
You look awful. I will be fine until the night is through, he promised me. I pursed my lips and sighed. You'd better keep that promise, I mumbled as we strode onward. We returned to our car. Mitch and I opened the card for the address. Advocate Ministries, 666 Sexton Drive, I read aloud. I lifted my head and wrinkled my nose.
Why does that address sound bad? The number is that of the beast or the devil, Vince informed me.
He started the car, and away we drove down the street. I cringed. As in the devil? I asked him. The same.
We're not going up against Satan, are we?
Unlikely. Even in the supernatural world there are those who believe he may not even exist, Vince replied.
But we've been fighting devils, I reminded him.
Merely creatures of the same persuasion, but not Mephistopheles himself, he argued. I blinked at him. Mephistopheles?
That sounds like bad arthritis or something.
It is an alternate name for the devil, he informed me.
Oh well, that would make it a bad something.
We putted on our way down the streets, and the address led us across the tracks to the poorer side of the city. The neighborhoods were slummy areas of crowded, single-story shacks with trash on the lawns, those that had lawns. Old trees with widowmakers shaded the rundown shanties, and wrecks of cars sat under the broken curbs. A few people peeked out from behind their ragged, hole-filled curtains, but other than that I spied no inhabitants, living or supernatural. I watched the poor houses pass by my window and sighed. A cemetery would be less depressing, I muttered. The blight Riven causes has no end, Vince commented. I turned to him, and gestured out the front window at the depressing sight.
Is this why you want to stop Riven?
One of many reasons, he replied. We traveled onward through the ruin of humanity, and arrived at our destination. Vince parked a half block down, and I squinted at the structure that stood on the corner. A church. The book factory is in an old church? I asked Vince. That was certainly what it looked like from that distance. It was a run-down church with a great, pointed wooden steeple that cut the sky and lorded over the desolate neighborhoods. Its stone walls were crumbling, and the stained glass windows were wrecked by stones and hammers. A small graveyard of toppled gravestones sat at the side nearest where we stood, and in front of the church and graveyard was the remains of a flower garden now filled with brown and dead weeds. Vince pursed his lips. Riven would be pleased with the irony of creating abominations in a formerly holy area, he pointed out.
Does this guy get his kicks out of kicking puppies too?
I quipped. Possibly, but we must get a closer look to confirm Lamia's information, Vince advised. We slipped out of the car and passed the nearest house on our left. Behind the houses sat a vacant alley, filled with piles of garbage and leaning old garages. Vince led the way down the block to the corner church, and we reached the iron-barred fence that surrounded the graveyard and ran around the entire rear of the church. Piles of trash leaned against the walls of the church and in the alley. The rear door of the church was boarded up, and I could see the small windows that led into the basement were also shut up. The small burial plots with their toppled headstones and piles of dirt looked lonely and forgotten amid that gloomy atmosphere. Vince stopped us at the corner of the graveyard, and I saw his eyes strain to see through the darkened, empty windows. Think we have the right place? I whispered to him. Undoubtedly, a voice spoke up behind us. We whirled around, to find ourselves staring at Officer Romero in full uniform. At his side stood Brutus, and the brute lifted his lips but didn't make a sound.
How the hell did you get here?
I questioned him. I overheard you read the address in the car outside the Immortal Serpent, and raced here, so my men and I could be at the ready to storm the facility. We've already looked the place over, and have detected a lot of magic use in the basement. It has to be the facility, he explained. How did you manage to convince your superiors you knew the location? Vince wondered. Romero shrugged. I didn't, but my men were convinced enough to follow me. My mind harkened back to our visit to the illicit, fighting Colosseum. So, exactly how long have you been following us? I've been tailing you since you left me, he explained. I nervously smiled at him.
So the whole time? The whole time, he replied.
I whipped my head to Vince, whose stoic face told me he knew more than he'd let on in this long adventure this night. You knew he was there, didn't you? I could smell his undeath, yes, Vince told me. I rolled my eyes and returned my attention to Romero. We weren't at any illegal cage match arena just to fight. We were just. Romero held up one of his stitched hands, and actually cracked a smile.
Your secret is safe.
I didn't call for backup until after you left the Colosseum, he assured me. I blinked my eyes at him. Backup? You mean Vince and I don't have to be the ones to risk our necks trying to bring down Riven? I asked him. He nodded. Yes. Tonight, we will show you what the Para Squad is capable of. Romero put 2 fingers to his lips and blew loud and clear. His whistle echoed through the quiet night, and brought alive the garbage in the alley and the piles of dirt in the graveyard. Dozens of rotting hands pushed up from the ground like some horrifying zombie movie, and zombie officers stumbled from the trash. The dozens of Para Squad officers stumbled toward the unholy church. They climbed through the windows and broke open the rear door and basement windows. Bright ceiling lights flickered on inside the basement and the ground floor, and the sound of gunshots reached our ears. Vince jumped forward to assist, but Romero held his arm out and blocked his path.
Not this time, vampire.
Let the zombies do their work. The zombie officers marched into the face of danger without hesitation, and overwhelmed the place through sheer numbers. It also helped that they were armed with familiar-looking bottles of red liquid. Some officers remained around the perimeter of the church with their weapons at the ready, and the rest fought a fierce battle inside. I heard screams and yells, and shadows and bodies flew by the lights on both floors. Romero knelt beside Brutus, who strained at the leash eager to join the fray. Easy there, boy. Not yet. Several devils crawled out the ground floor windows with zombies close behind them. Most of them didn't make it very far before the contents in a half-dozen spray bottles hit their legs, and they stumbled to the ground writhing in agony, as their flesh was burned by the blood. The exterior zombies grabbed the devils and dragged them to the front, where parasquad cars sped up and parked on the weed-choked lawn. One devil managed to leap over the spraying, and land 10 feet from us. Romero unleashed his undead dog. Brutus leaped at the devil, and grabbed the thin red creature by its neck. The dog shook the devil like it was a rag doll, and Romero rushed up and clamped a pair of special handcuffs on the wrists of the devil. Brutus, heel, Romero commanded. Brutus reluctantly released the devil, and Romero hefted his ragged captive to its feet. No more running tonight, the officer commented, as he handed the devil to one of his subordinates. He clasped the leash around Brutus' neck, and stood by for any further escapees. The battle lasted for 10 minutes, and in the end the parasquad officers emerged victorious with a long line of captives, ready to be interrogated. They also carried with them lab equipment such as beakers and vials, filled with strange colored liquids. Of the couple dozen zombies, I noticed a few didn't make it out in one piece, and more than one was slashed to ribbons by the claws of the devils. Their partners hauled them to the squad cars and pieced them back together with thick thread and needles. I pointed at the plastic spray bottles. Did you get the idea from Mitch? It was about time that cellar of secrets was useful to the squad, Romero quipped. If we have fulfilled our promise, then I ask that you fulfill yours, Vince spoke up. You have, and I'm a zombie of my word. Romero held the leash out to us, but Brutus snarled in Vince's direction. I knelt down and smiled at the menacing mutt. Hello there, I cooed. You look like such a nice doggy. You're a nice doggy, aren't you? Do you want to go find some bones for us? At mention of bones, the zombie dog stopped growling, and its remaining ear perked up. Romero sighed. You've found his only weakness. No matter how much training he goes through, he will obey anyone who even mentions bones. He handed the leash to me, and Brutus rubbed his side against my leg and looked up at me with those cute clouded eyes. Take care of him. He's the best dog a zombie could dig up. We'll have him back in no time, I promised. And I would like a bottle of the blood, Vince requested. Romero raised an eyebrow, but pulled a small spray bottle from inside his jacket and handed it to Vince. More trouble with devils, he guessed. We shall see, Vince replied as he pocketed the liquid. I looked to Vince and smiled. Time to finish this? Time to finish this, he agreed. Chapter 12. By the time we returned to Harriet's former property, the night was waning. The sun would rise in an hour, and we would have to put our original case on hold. The property was as quiet as the grave, as we parked the car in the darkness of the wild trees. We three, Brutus included, walked up the slight incline to the house, but Harriet was nowhere to be found. Think she's taking a dirt nap? I quipped as we reached the basement door. Vince's serious face killed my joke and my smile. What is it? Harriet is not here, he revealed. I frowned. How can you tell? A haunted place has a chill that settles on the bones. I no longer feel that chill here, he explained. I recalled the first time we came to the house, and the chill that swept over me as I stared at the house. You're right, it is gone, I agreed. Vince walked toward the front of the house. Hey, wait! I called out as Brutus and I rushed after him. I caught up to him at the corner of the home.
Does this mean she's at rest?
I wondered. Vince paused and his eyes narrowed. I followed his gaze, and saw the lights in the cottage were on. You think he knows something we don't? I guessed. Brutus flattened his ears and growled at the cottage.
What's wrong with you two?
The scent of death comes from the cottage, as does the scent of a devil, Vince explained.
Then that means…
I wasn't sure what that meant, but Vince strode forward and I followed. We came to the door, and I sniffed the air.
You know what I don't smell?
All that nasty stuff, I commented. It has been taken away, Vince agreed. The door to the cottage was slightly ajar, and he pushed it open. The door swung open on its creaky hinges, and revealed a large front room. There was the kitchen and dining space on the left, and the living room and hanging body on the right. At the rear was the bath and bedrooms. Wait a second. Something wasn't right here. I pointed a shaking finger at the body that hung from the ceiling. Vince? Vince sprinted into the room and jumped into the air. He sliced the sturdy rope with his hand, and dropped to the ground in time to catch the body. The limp form fell into his arms, and he lowered the person to the floor. I hurried up and cringed when the bloated face of Bobby Morley stared back at me with wide, unblinking eyes. He's dead, yes, and has been for a few hours, Vince confirmed. He set the corpse on the floor, and examined the room. There was a nearby chair for him to step on, and the rope had been connected to one of the open rafter beams. Suicide, I guessed. So it's made to appear, he agreed. Brutus sniffed the air and growled.
Heel, Brutus.
What do you mean, made to appear? I asked Vince. Vince nodded at the dog. Brutus can smell that a devil has been here, and all the anti-supernatural equipment he purchased has disappeared. So the devil he bought it from collected their stuff and his life? I surmised. So it appears, Vince confirmed. He stood and wandered around the room. My eyes invariably wandered to the dead man. He lay with his shoes closest to me, and their clean soles reminded me of something somebody said to us earlier that night. I furrowed my brow, and glanced over my shoulder at Vince. Who told us about Bobby's dirty shoes? I asked him. Vince paused and turned to me with a raised eyebrow. The attorney, Bartlett. Why? Did he say that the dirt was from the basement, but that Bobby didn't tell him what he'd been up to? I wondered.
Yes, Vince paused and his eyes widened.
And didn't Harriet say the attorney never went into the house, as far as she knew? I added. Vince's eyes narrowed, and his hands balled into fists at his sides. It appears we must pay another visit to the attorney.
But what about him?
I asked as I gestured to the corpse. We can do nothing more for him, and our presence would only bring awkward questions, Vince pointed out. We abandoned the body, and drove to the attorney's office. At that early hour the streets were still deserted, but the lights were still on inside the office.
How late does this guy work?
I wondered aloud as we stepped out. I held Brutus' leash, and the zombie dog sniffed the air and curled its lips back in a ghastly snarl.
I know this isn't where the bones are, but we'll find them, I tried to soothe him.
He smells something far more dangerous than bones, Vince countered. He strode to the door, but tripped on a crack in the broken sidewalk. His shoulder stumbled into the side of the building. I hurried to his side, and noticed his face was still ghastly pale.
You sure you're up for this?
I asked him. We have no choice, he pointed out. Vince righted himself and led the way into the office. When I stepped one foot into the sitting room, Brutus went berserk. He jumped forward and snapped at the door that led to the rear of the building. I grabbed the leash with both hands and tried to tug him backward, but he dragged me toward the door. Bad Brutus. No. I shouted. The door swung open, but there was nobody on the other side. Brutus didn't mind the ghostly lack of a person, and pulled me through the entrance. Do something. I shouted at my partner. Vince jumped forward and snatched my hands. He yanked me off the leash, and Brutus sprinted into the depths of the building.
"Why'd you do that?"
I growled. "We need him to lead us to the scent," Vince argued as he took off after the zombie dog. I sighed and rushed after the pair. Brutus led us to an open hatch at the rear of the building that led into a dimly lit basement. The dog flew down the stairs and us at his heels. Brutus skipped a final few steps and landed on the cement floor. His hackles, or what remained on his rotting flesh, were raised, and his lips were curled back in a snarl so fierce he would have scared Harriet. We joined him at the bottom, and beheld a different basement than what I expected. There were numerous tables set up around the walls, and each one held scientific equipment. There were vials of strange colored liquids on the shelves above the tables. I gasped when I recognized the same ingredients as though confiscated from the book factory. Vince walked over to the nearest table and picked up one of the vials. He swished the contents, and the liquid splashed against the glass. Rather than fading away, the liquid left a smear that resembled a hideous skeletal face. Vince frowned and swept his eyes over the remaining tables. "Advocate Ministries," he growled. There came a clap from behind us, and we spun around in time to see Attorney Bartlett walk down the stairs. He had a wide grin on his face, and his eyes were a bright yellow color. "Bravo. You figured it all out, detective." "A little late and slow, but a solid deduction." Brutus backed up to stand in front of us, and I sidled up close to Vince.
"What's going on?"
I whispered. "Haven't you guessed?" Bartlett mused as he stepped onto the basement floor. He strode past us, and over to a table to the left of the stairs. The man raised his arms to the room. "This is my little experiment lab, but after your interference it appears it's my only lab." My eyes widened when I recalled something actually useful from my school days. "Advocate is another name for an attorney." Bartlett chuckled. "You're even slower than the vampire here. It's amazing Vincent here hasn't done the world a favor and killed you both." Vince's eyes narrowed. "You pretended to be hypnotized by me to throw us off the trail."
"Yes, and wasn't it a good show?" Bartlett mused.
He picked up a vial and swished around the contents. "Imagine my surprise to find you on my scent, especially when it was that idiot Morley and his senile mother who brought you here. I had to have my men follow you, but I believe they became a little hasty in dealing with you. They paid with their lives, but the mistake was made. You have no idea how hard it is to find good help these days." "Wait, you're the leader of those devils?" I guessed. Bartlett placed the vial back, and turned to me with a grand bow. "Guilty as charged, as they say in the human courts." "You are the leader of the supernatural syndicate," Vince proclaimed. "Again I plead guilty," Bartlett replied. He lifted his face and the smile slid from his face. His eyes narrowed as he straightened. "Unfortunately, you interfered with a very lucrative business arrangement, and my important client is very upset with me. That has forced me to temporarily move my operations to my office, until I can find a more permanent space." "Wait a sec, so this guy," I gestured to the short, portly fellow, "is the leader of those devils?" Bartlett glanced down at himself. "Yes, this disguise fools idiots and those who are too rushed to notice. You both fall under one of those categories, but I must excuse you, Vincent, for your lack of care. I have been in the anti-supernatural business long enough to be able to hide my identity when I wish. However, that time has passed." My eyes widened when I beheld long curled horns sprout from Bartlett's forehead. His body stretched upward until he was 6 feet tall, and a tail swept out his rear and cracked the air like a whip. His suit ripped open and exposed tight, bulging muscles, and his skin changed to the familiar red color of a devil. He fisted his thick, powerful hands as his fingers blended into 3, and his shoes broke open to reveal cloven hooves. If there was ever a devil on earth, this guy was it. "Oh shit," I commented. A smirk slid onto his face. "It is far worse than that." He stepped back to a pile of boxes, and tipped the top one over. Piles of bones slid from the box and onto the floor. He took a vial of liquid off a nearby table, and dumped the contents onto the bones. A small tornado whipped out of nowhere and swept up the bones. The wind glowed with a brilliant white color as the bones spun around in the tornado. The tornado lined the bones up in 6 piles and lifted the bones up so they were all placed as they should be. The song with the lines, "The leg bone connected to the hip bone," ran through my mind as the wind built the skeletons from the toes up until they were complete. The wind swept away from the bony bodies, but they stood on their own. A dark purple glow appeared in their sockets, and they looked around in wonder.
"Where am I?"
spoke one skeleton. "This isn't my grave," another exclaimed. The third stepped toward us and shook their bony fist in our direction.
"What the hell have you 2 fools done?" the skeleton growled.
"Harriet?" I yelped. The skeleton was indeed Harriet, reunited with her former body. "Stand down, Bones," Bartlett ordered the skeletons. I was dismayed when Harriet shut her mouth with a bony rattle and stepped back into line with the other 5. Bartlett gestured to the bones. "You see, as the caller of their resurrection, I have complete control over them, which is very unfortunate for you both, as unlike we devils, they are nearly impossible to destroy." He snapped his fingers and the skeletons leaped at us. Chapter 13. Imagine trying to fight a half-dozen skeletons in the confines of a small room filled with vials, the contents of which you have no idea what it is or would do to you, with a devil maniacally laughing in the background. Also keep in mind, one of the skeletons was a client of yours, who still hadn't paid you for running your asses off trying to solve her problem. Take that image, and that was pretty much the dilemma Vince and I faced as the skeletons jumped us. Vince and I dove out of the way, and I rolled beneath a nearby table. The skeletons landed where we just stood, and that was their first mistake. Brutus had stood stock still and absolutely quiet during Bartlett's big bony reveal, but now the dog had the bones within reach and dove at the chance for a delicious nibble. The zombie mutt chomped down on the nearest leg bone, and the skeleton victim yelped and tried to kick him off. Brutus wasn't letting go, and instead climbed up the leg bone with an aim for the juicy ribs. That was 1 bony distracted, and 5 more to go. The one formerly known as Harriet, and another one followed me under the table, and the other 3 went for Vince. Vince slid under one of the tables in the center of the room, and spun around to face them across the table. He pulled the spray bottle given to him by Romero from his coat, and a red mist shot from the item. The mist covered the bonies, and they screamed in agony as steam arose from their bones. The unnatural purple light flew from their eye sockets in a long glowing stream of brilliance, and their bodies collapsed into piles of dusty bones. The streams of light swept upward through the ceiling and disappeared. My own battle wasn't going so well, as I ducked and dove beneath their slashing bony hands. They hopped atop tables as I slid beneath them, and liquid goop from the vials spilled everywhere. I ran myself into a corner, literally, as the bonies slunk toward me with their wide, evil grins on their faces. "Vince, a little help here," I shouted. He tossed me the spray bottle and charged Bartlett. I juggled the plastic bottle for a few moments, just as the bonies jumped me. I slid to the ground, grabbed the neck and sprayed a healthy dose of the lamb's blood over their bodies. They screamed like their brethren, and fell to the floor as their souls were forced from their bodies.
"Sorry," I squeaked as I stepped over them.
There went our agreement with Harriet. I joined Vince and we both confronted Bartlett, who now stood with one of the hated magical books in one hand. The pages were open, and he was backed against the near corner of the basement wall. There was a smile on his lips as he held his free hand over the pages. "You believe you can defeat the prince of all the devils, pathetic vampires," he snarled.
"No, but we're going to try," I quipped.
Bartlett chuckled, and his fingers wiggled above the book. "Then try with the full force of all hell's might inside of me." A tendril of black mist arose from the book, and swirled around him like a transparent snake. Bartlett stretched up, and his height extended to 7 feet so that his horns brushed against the top of the ceiling. His horns curled twice over themselves like a ram, but a bull-like mane of thick black coarse hair tore open his shirt and swept down his bare back. He reared his head back, and his nose widened and flattened like that of a bull. His clawed hands thickened to almost hooves, and his pants tore open so only the cloth around his waist remained. His muscles thickened and stretched as they were pumped full of the demonic powers he'd called from hell. The yellow in his eyes changed to bottomless black, and he looked at us with all the fury of hell. Bartlett cast aside the book and bellowed at us. He pushed off from the wall, and Vince pushed me aside and jumped to the opposite wall before we were both trampled. The raging bull rammed through the tables, and slammed into the upper part of the far wall. His horns sank deeply into the structure, but he pressed his palms against the wall and pulled himself out. Holes remained in the walls and the cracks swept across the wall, destabilizing the entire structure. Bartlett faced us and his black eyes fell on me. I stood against the corner opposite the stairs, and the wreck of 1,000 vials lay around me, so that I dared not move for fear of turning into something monstrous like that. Bartlett snorted, and burning sulfur erupted from his nostrils. The bull charged me, but a flash of Vince swept in front of me and grabbed the bull by the horns. Vince whipped his head over his shoulders at me. The bottle. He couldn't finish his sentence before the bull swung his head from Vince's grasp and impaled Vince on one of its horns. No! I screamed as Bartlett lifted Vince off the floor. Vince grasped the horn that stuck through his upper chest and thrashed, but he couldn't budge. The bottle, he choked out. Blood drizzled from his mouth and spilled from the hole in his chest. I tossed the bottle to him, and Vince caught it in one hand. Always the show-off. He jabbed the bottle onto the other horn, and they were both doused by the contents. The bull creature flung its head back and Vince was thrown from the horn. He landed hard against the far wall of the basement, and Bartlett stumbled blindly around the room, destroying what remained of his experiments. The creature clutched at his eyes and clawed at his skin, but that only spread the blood to further parts of his body. The pure blood ate at his impure self, and in 10 seconds his body collapsed to the floor in a puddle of bubbling gooey red mess. I rushed past the red puddle and over to Vince. He lay atop a mess of boxes, and when I saw him I covered my mouth to stifle my gasp. Half his face was gone, dissolved by the blood, and even now it continued to eat away at him. I collapsed to my knees in front of him, and grasped one of his dissolving hands. Brutus came up beside me with a bone in his mouth and whimpered. Vince managed a small smile at me. Are you safe? He whispered. Tears sprang to my eyes but I managed to nod. Yeah, but... He pressed the fingers of his free hand against my lips, and shook his head. The sacrifice was worth the reward, he countered. I squeezed his hand and shook my head. You idiot. Now we're both going to die, I sniffled. Take what remains of my life and live, he offered me. I blinked at him. Do what? He clasped my hands in both of his and the ring glowed brightly. Take my life and you will live. What remains of my immortality will sustain you for decades. You can do that? I asked him. Vince smiled and nodded, but a coughing fit interrupted the moment. Blood spewed from his mouth, and the blood deepened its march into his skin as it revealed parts of his skull. Vince. Vince, don't leave me. I don't want your life, I want you. The light from his ring grew brighter, and reminded me of a past brilliance. My eyes widened, and I pressed our rings together. Take my life. Like I did to you in the alley after we first met. Vince shook his head but I pursed my lips, grasped his hands and closed my eyes. If the transfer could work one way, it could work the other. It just had to. I focused all my thoughts on my life energy, and on the cold dissolving skin of Vince as his fingers rotted away beneath mine. Come on. Come on. Please take it. I chanted. A bright light shot through my eyes, and I opened them to see my ring glow brighter than the light from his. My light overwhelmed us both in a warm brilliance that covered us like a heated blanket on a cool winter's day. Life pulled from me into my ring as it had done in the alley when I fought Field, but the pull wasn't violent or painful. It was soothing and warm, and I couldn't help smiling as my life faded into the powerful trinket. Through the brilliant light, I could see Vince's face as he lay atop the boxes. The energy from my body slipped into his ring, and through that, into his finger, and to the rest of his body. The light washed away the blood and knitted his flesh back together. Muscle and skin covered bone, and life entered Vince's dark red eyes. The light from my ring faded as Vince's life grew, and in a moment the glow dimmed to nothing, and shadows slipped over us. Sunlight from the rising day star shone through the holes made by Bartlett's horns. An indescribable exhaustion swept over me. The world around me dimmed to where I could only see Vince's dark, and yet angelic face. My head grew woozy, and I fell forward. Vince sat up and caught me in his hands. I'd never known them to be as warm as they were then. He turned me over to cradle me in his arms.
"You saved me once more," he whispered.
I managed a weak smile. "I did, didn't I? This calls for a nap." I couldn't keep my heavy eyelids open, and sleep took me. Chapter 14. In my sleep I dreamed. I hadn't dreamed for many weeks. In my dream I stood on a plain filled with a bright white that stretched on forever. A smooth white floor lay beneath me, and above me lay the endless white sky. The void was large and empty, but I wasn't terrified. There was a peacefulness that filled my whole being, and made me smile. "There you are," a voice quipped. I spun around to find Harriet standing behind me. No longer was she Harriet the ghost, but woman of flesh. She strode toward me with her perpetual frown on her face, and her shoes clacking softly on the hard floor. "I've been looking all over for you. It's a hard time finding sleeping people."
"Sleeping?
Then this really is a dream?" I wondered.
Well, sort of.
"I think the man upstairs is giving us a nice room that won't distract us from what I have to say," Harriet explained. I cringed. I'm not dead, am I?" Harriet snorted. "No more dead than that vampire you're stuck to, and speaking of him, there's some unfinished business we have to talk about. That's why I've come to see you. You kept up your half of the bargain, so I suppose I'll tell you where you can find what Hilda gave to me." My face lit up with a bright smile. "Really?" She held up her hand.
"Don't think I'm getting soft.
I'm just holding up my half of our agreement. What you're looking for is in the hollow tree, the one I used to rest in after that ugly man stole my body." She wrinkled her nose at the remembrance. "He did it just to get Bobby to pay his bills, but that idiot boy refused and thought he could keep that devil out of his cottage with his own anti-supernatural junk." My eyes lit up as I recalled finding the man. "Bobby. He's—" "I know. I've already been to see him," Harriet revealed. She sighed and shook her head. "I did all I could for him in the other life, but he made his own grave and it's all done now. No loose ends or wandering around the yard."
"So you get to go to the other side?"
I asked her. Harriet nodded.
"Yep, thanks to you.
Whatever you sprayed on me released my soul from those bones and let me up here, but I couldn't go all the way until I finished my business with you. Now that that's all done, it's time for me to join that choir up there. I'm not much of a singer, but I'll give it a try." "Good luck," I called to her. She snorted, and I noticed her feet lifted off the ground. "Keep that for yourself. You're going to need it dealing with the people who killed Hilda. Oh, and give them a good beating for me too, will you?" "I will," I called back. Harriet rose higher, and the farther she went the faster she flew. I tilted my head back, and waved to her until I couldn't see her anymore. Then I returned my attention to the nothingness around me, and blinked at it.
How do I wake up?"
I wondered. In answer to my question, a burst of light appeared to my left. I glanced in that direction, and saw a swirling wind of light with a dark center. From the center, I heard the echo of a familiar voice call my name. "Liz. Liz." I raised an eyebrow. "Vince. Liz. Vince." I rushed into the light, and it engulfed me in its warm brilliance. That's when I woke up to a massive hangover. Oh, and the darkness of my shabby bedroom in our even shabbier apartment. My eyes fluttered open, and I grimaced when the granddaddy of all headaches hit me with the daintiness of a pro wrestler in a glass factory. I sat up and rubbed my aching head. Beside me on the edge of the bed sat Vince, and his sparkling red eyes and smile told me he was glad I was awake.
"What hit me?"
I mumbled. "The energy transfer. It drained your life force enough to keep you in a coma for 2 days," he revealed. I blinked at him. "That long? What did it do to you?" "I was given enough energy to withstand the sunlight to the car and return us to the apartment," he replied.
"So practically no side effects?"
I returned. "Practically none," he agreed. I dropped my hand to my side and smiled at him. "Good. At least one of us doesn't have to deal with this, and you're as alive as you've ever been." Vince's smile faltered. "I am, but you should not have transferred as much energy as you did." I frowned. "Why? Didn't you need everything I gave you?"
"Yes, as did you."
I raised an eyebrow. "Come again." Vince turned away and pursed his lips. "Do you recall I once told you the power of the ring should be used sparingly?" "Actually, you've probably told me that a lot of times, but I don't think I've listened," I quipped. "No, you haven't, and the consequences are already visible." One of his hands slid over to mine, and I glanced down. My eyes widened when I saw that my hands were very thin like Vince's, and the fingernails were much longer than I remembered. I raised my hand to my face and turned it over.
"So I lost weight?"
I guessed. "No, you lost a large part of your humanity," he revealed. I looked past my hand to glare at him. "Vince, you're speaking in riddles." "Just spit out what's wrong with me," I ordered him. He stood and faced me. "Your use of the ring has cost you a majority of your life energy. A few more uses will cost you your human life." My eyes widened, and my mouth dropped open.
"What? That wasn't part of the deal with this ring."
He shook his head.
"That is the most important part of the deal.
The ring gives you an immortality of sorts that extends your human life beyond what is normal, but using the ring removes those years. The episode when we were both human, and you used the ring drained several centaurs' worth of use. You have used the ring beyond even your normal lifespan, and have shortened your life to barely a few years." I jumped off the bed, but my head swooned and my legs buckled. I fell forward, but Vince caught me, and I lifted my eyes to his face. "You mean I'm going to kick the bucket?" "No. You will finish your transformation into a vampire." My mouth dropped to the floor. "I'm going to what?" "Become a vampire." I pushed away from him, and the back of my knees hit the bed. I fell back to sit on the edge, and my eyes stared straight ahead without seeing the filthy walls. "A vampire?" I whispered. I ran a hand through my hair.
I guess that isn't." I shook my head and looked up at Vince.
He stared down at me with indifferent red eyes.
"It's bad, isn't it?"
"All the weaknesses of a vampire will be yours," Vince told me. I cringed. "So more hunger?" "A great deal."
"No more sun?"
"No longer." "But more superhuman strength and speed, right?" He shook his head. "You would start at the same strength as you are now." I clutched my head between my hands and stared at the floor.
"This isn't happening. This just isn't happening."
I couldn't stop the tears of frustration that rose in my eyes, and I looked to my partner for pity. "Please tell me this is your idea of a really bad joke. I mean, it's okay being a half-vampire human person thing, but the whole thing. I like the sun. I like interacting with people who I wouldn't consider my food."
"There is nothing you can do to stop the change, only slow it," he revealed.
I pounded a fist into the mattress. "Damn it. Just damn it." The bed groaned as Vince seated himself beside me. His red eyes scrutinized my bleary eyes and red cheeks. "There is one way to slow your fate." I raised an eyebrow and wiped the tears from my eyes.
"What's that?"
"Remain in the apartment while I finish what Tim started." My brow crashed down and I glared at him.
No. That is I'm not going to let you get us both killed out there.
You need my help, and by God or the devil, I'm going to finish it, I insisted. But you may. I pushed off from the bed, and this time I didn't trip over myself as I spun around to face him.
I'm not going to let you go it alone.
We're partners, and no matter how bad my self-pity party gets, I'm not going to forget that, and you'd better not either. We have to finish what Tim was working on, and you need me to tell you where the thing is that Hilda gave to Harriet. He raised an eyebrow.
You know?
I folded my arms and gave a nod. Yep, Harriet told me in my dream or a dream or whatever it was. Either way, I'm not going to tell you unless you bring me along, and don't leave me at the apartment ever. Got it? Vince stood and a small smile slipped onto his lips. If that is your wish.
You're damn right it is.
Besides, if I'm going to get permanently killed or permanently undead, then I'm at least going to take Riven down for starting this whole mess, I added. Vince stepped back and bowed at the waist toward me. I wish the same, and will remain by your side for as long as that takes. I snatched his arm, looped it through my own, and tugged him toward the bedroom door.
Well, it's taking too long already, so let's get to the hollow tree at Harriet's property before I turn into a blood-sucking fiend.
No offense. He chuckled as we strode from the room. No offense taken. Vince drove us back to the abandoned property, and it took a few minutes to find the hollow tree. It stood a dozen yards from the road, and had a clear view of the house and cottage. My eyes drifted over to the dark buildings. You think anybody's found Bobby yet? Besides us, that is, I asked Vince. No, or the police would have closed the property and placed guards, he pointed out. His attention was focused on a round hole in the tree. He reached his hand inside and pulled out a slip of paper. I stepped up beside him as he unfolded the paper, and I read aloud the handwritten contents. Where it began, so shall it end. I glanced at Vince.
What does that mean?
He shook his head and pocketed the paper. I am not sure, but the handwriting is Tim's. I sighed and shook my head. Great, more clues, I muttered. I winced when the hangover shot through my temples, and I clutched my head. Vince noticed my swaying and grasped my arms to keep me upright. I sheepishly smiled at him. I'm fine, but think we can take a break, just for the rest of the night? And maybe the one after that? I pleaded. And the next if you wish, he returned. I snorted. And maybe the next. We could make this a regular vacation, or a practice for that retirement we talked about earlier. I could use it, and I bet you're a couple of centuries overdue. You must have a hell of a social security fund waiting for you. Vince smiled and led me back to the car. I will give you this night to rest, and tomorrow we will continue our game of hide and seek with Tim. I grinned and looked up at the dark night sky.
Yeah, one last game with Tim.
And the end was coming. I could feel it in my bones.